the overall economic direction of the county. We have the privilege today of presenting you with two knowledgeable and dynamic speakers, Mr. Eric Bowles and Dr. Sean Andrews. Today's topics include leading in the new reality and hidden bias, inclusion, and diversity for employers. This event is just one of many collaborative projects brought to fruition through the long-standing partnership between OhioMeansJobs Union County and the Union County Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. I'm going to now turn things over to Jason Stanford. He's going to review some housekeeping issues and welcome our first speaker. Thank you all.
Thank you, Stacia. I appreciate the introduction and welcome everybody. As Stacia mentioned, my name is Jason Stanford. I'm the Development Services Manager here at the Union County Marysville Economic Development Partnership. So you can see kind of what our organization does here on your screen. I do want to share a few housekeeping items as we begin here. First and foremost, please keep your microphones muted throughout the meeting. Obviously, this just keeps everything kind of quiet so our speakers have the opportunity to weigh in on their topics. But we do ask that you please keep your cameras on as much as you can throughout this meeting, and that helps our speakers to better gauge reactions and have a little bit of interaction with everybody too. So if you guys don't mind, please turn your cameras back on. Also, as I mentioned too, interaction is welcome and encouraged. I know it's a little bit difficult with our virtual world we now live in, but if there are questions, that are asked and things like that, please respond using the chat function. And just keep in mind too, we will collect general questions and read those through the Q&A sessions after each speaker. Keep in mind too that the presentation will be recorded. It's actually recording now, and it will be available online late next week or the week after. So we will send an email link to everybody in the next few weeks, a couple days. And then just keep in mind too that we do plan on having a 5-minute restroom break at about 2:25 later here. So please feel free to take advantage of that. So I'm going to let a few more people in and then introduce Mr. Bowles. So give me just a second here. Okay. All right, so I'm very happy to welcome Eric Bowles to this discussion today. So Eric is the president of the Game Changers Incorporated. Through a combination of coaching, consulting, and training, Eric helps organizations like ours basically collapse time and achieve goals quickly, and of course function within their purpose and values. When we started really planning this exercise, we wanted somebody like Eric that really knows what he's talking about. And this guy is awesome. So I'm really excited that he's here today. Prior to becoming a high performance authority, he learned many of the principles of team dynamics and leadership in his experience in playing in the NFL. He's also he was coached and mentored by some of the finest coaches in the league. So a lot of great background and a lot of great experience there. So Eric, very happy to have you again. And that being said, if you'll unmute yourself, the floor is yours, sir.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, Jason. Appreciate it, my friend. Jason, one of the things that I was really, give me 1 second here so I can see myself. There we go. One of the things that was really, really important to me in getting prepared for presenting to you all is I really paid attention to the title of your conference, which is Leadership in a Post-Pandemic World. And so with that title, that's where we want to put our emphasis today, which is leading in a new reality. First of all, to all those who are watching and hear me, I'm in Colorado right now. I'm in Fort Collins, Colorado. Typically, I'm in my home, which is in Lakewood, Washington. And so I'm coming to you. Fortunately, I have a dear friend here who allowed me to use this studio. I usually do it from my home studio, but I would be remiss if I didn't tell all of you why. And as I get ready to go through this presentation of leading a new reality, I always like to allow my own life to be used as an example as we go through the process. So I have two girls. My oldest daughter is Taylor, and my youngest daughter is Madison. Taylor's a My wife and I, my wife Cindy, I better mention my wife Cindy, this is being recorded. But my oldest daughter, Taylor, actually works with me. She's a graduate of University of Washington, but my youngest daughter, Madison, plays volleyball at Colorado State University. The reason I'm doing it from Colorado is for all the parents out there, you know, when your daughter or your son at an age calls you, you just go, right? And so I got the phone call. My youngest daughter has autoimmune disease called lupus. And because of that, she's had some pretty significant flare-ups and other challenges. And so we're actually going through a new reality right now, because it's a little more aggressive than it's ever been before. And so it's not just our own health that we're managing through. We're also managing through what it's like when you spend a whole lot of your time working for a goal, and then some things out of your control starts to disrupt that. And at that age, how do you manage that? So a lot of the things we're talking about today, I'm going to be talking about things that I'm in a very real way walking through myself. And so as we go through this experience, here's what I'm going to ask everyone hearing me. Please engage with me. You can use using the chat function, which is great. Please do that. Not only with the chat function, will I ask you to, we're going to do some Q&A, I believe, Jason, kind of help facilitate that, I believe, when we get to that portion of it. But the other thing that I'm going to ask that each of you do is I'm going to ask that you take notes, right? And so if you're a note taker, I'm going to ask you to take notes. And when you're taking notes, I want you to capture what comes to mind, not necessarily what I say, but what comes to mind when something is said. That's far more valuable. I like to call that insightful learning. Those are, I like to not only present, but I learn through aha moments. I like to call myself Captain Obvious, if you've ever seen that commercial. And an aha moment is simply when the obvious slaps you upside your head. Okay, so I believe for a lot of us, it's not that we need to learn something new. Many times we just need to be reminded of what we already know and begin to apply it. Point number two, moments we go through this, I do get a little excited. So if you see me start sweating, believe me, it's not you. I just think too hard and I start sweating through the top of my head. Jason and I got that in common. So, so we're just good. Not a whole lot up there to keep it in. But then the third thing that I ask is, as we're going through it, that you be here. And what I mean by being here, be present. Focus isn't natural. It's not always easy. It's a discipline. And not that people are doing a whole bunch of other stuff, but I'm pretty sure everyone has busy things they have to do or things they have to be concerned about. I'm going to ask for this time that I have you for this hour and a half or hour and 15 minutes, whatever that number is. I'm going to ask that you get a little selfish here and let this be for you. And so as we walk through this process, I'm just going to ask you to engage that way. Okay, so that's first and foremost. So let's jump right into it. So I'm talking about leading in a new reality. The reality is everything is new and it is not the same. Whether we like it or not, whether we admit it or not, the world has changed, and not just because of the pandemic. It's just the impact of things happening. I was told recently, and it was great. It was an insightful discussion I had with a mentor of mine, and he says, you know, there's always storms. The thing that shocks us is that a storm is just natural elements converging in unique ways, right? It's nothing that we don't always see, but you just don't always get it all together at the same time. And he broke it down like this. He says, when this is a storm, like we all like wind when it cools us down. We all like water when it quenches our thirst or we swim in it. We all like rain when it, it helps our plants. We just don't like it when they all converge together and they do things completely out of the ordinary, which ends up destroying stuff. And he goes, that's what, and metaphorically, that's what a lot of us have been having to lead through, which is a storm of things converging in unique ways. Now, what makes this even more unique is your own storms that you have in your own personal life didn't go away. Okay, so you got your own individual challenges along with having to lead and encourage others to get through challenges. And the process just continues on. What my primary goal today is, how do we not just survive these changes? I always like to say, how do we manage these rapids of change? But more than just manage it, how do we not just survive it, how do we thrive through it? How do we get to the other side where this is now, we can look back and say, these things that we had to go through have happened for us, not just to us. And so that's my primary goal with today. With that being said, Jason, if you don't mind pulling up that first slide for me. And so here's the question I have for you all. Here's the question I have. And that is, right here, what do you see? Now, you can throw that in the chat function. It really pretty self-explanatory, but every time I ask the question, what do you see? I hear this from people often. I see an acorn. Somebody else sees something else. Somebody says a seed. If, you know, based on my age and where my kids were, somebody might scream out Ice Age, right? The movie, right? But the reality, it is an acorn. It truly is an acorn. But the real question, I didn't ask, what are you looking at? I asked what you see, because there's someone else looking at this same thing, and they don't just see an acorn. They actually see an oak tree. So Jason, if you go to the next slide. And so what do you see when I ask that question? On the inside of that small little acorn is this mighty oak. Now, I don't want to go too far ahead. I'm going to stay right here. And Jason, you can actually bring it back to me, which would be okay. It is the transition of the process of change that makes that interesting. So again, we've all seen these metaphors before, but let me make this perfectly clear. Inside of that acorn is that mighty oak. The challenge is, how do you ensure, how do we raise the probability that that oak tree actually takes place, comes out of that acorn? Now, I'm using this as an analogy, but the title of this message isn't managing into a new reality. It's called leading. And if all of us would sit back and think about leaders that we had or individuals in our lives, some of the most significant leaders in our lives, what they were able to do was see an oak tree why we still look like acorns. And they actually began to coach and lead what was on the inside of us out of us. And this is what separates, and I want to make this very clear, this is what separates, I would say, quality leaders, great leaders today from mediocre ones. And there's a lot of leaders who look at an acorn, all they do is see an acorn, and guess what? They manage them like acorns. But then there's others who can see the possibility inside, and they're able to pull that out. Now, this is very important. It's not only do we look at in terms of opportunities or the things that we got to work on, but when it comes to the very people that we influence and lead, everything that we want, everything that's going to allow us to be successful in the future and really thrive and survive and be the best that we can be, many times it's already in our hands. We may be already leading and working with the very people we need to get to where we need to go. The key is, how do we ensure we pull the best out of them in order to get there? Now, using the same analogy, if that simple little acorn, and I got one on my desk at my office, I didn't bring it here with me, but if I have an acorn, I do, that's been on my desk for about 15 years. Well, guess what? In 15 years, it's still an acorn, okay? And nothing's changed. I mean, as long as it is sitting on my desk, comfortable, secure, no challenges, it will remain what it is. What makes the change happen is when that acorn actually gets into the ground and goes through the process necessary to actually have its potential released. Now, I'm saying something that's, you know, you're like, duh, that's obvious. But if you think about where we're at right now, with all the issues and challenges and changes that we're all dealing with right now, like as leaders across the board, not just there in Union County, not just in the work you all are doing, but Jason and I were talking about a little earlier, like the changes of demographics, the changes of people you need to serve, the change of these are all changes that are taking place. And when these kind of changes start taking place, you start wondering, do we have the capacity? Do we have what we need? Can we get this done? And many times I will say, our next opportunity that we discover is usually dressed up as a difficulty, right? The oak tree looks like an acorn right now. So how does it go from the acorn to an oak tree? Well, just like it happens with us, sometimes we feel like we're just being buried under the problems. We're not buried under problems. We've been planted, and it's going through those problems that we discover what else is possible. Now, I guess I'm a little more, even more emotional about this because, sitting there at the doctor's office, getting ready to do these infusions, looking at my daughter, and there's times where you just want to go, oh, is she going to be okay? And those parents out there who understand, there's nothing like, almost feeling helpless when it comes to your kids, right? Like there's a whole lot of things you want to be able to control, manage, but when it comes to your kids and there's some things you can't do anything about, but just be supportive, that's a tough place to be. But in the midst of that difficulty, where's the opportunity? Where's the growth? How do we make sure that this just didn't happen to us, that this was able to happen for us? And I start to realize it really is an attitude. It is a mindset. And we're going to go deeper into that. But man, can I look at everything that's going on right now in my life and go, do I see the opportunity in it? They say the difference between high performers and low performers is, high performers, they see opportunity inside every difficulty. Many times low performers, they can find difficulty inside every single opportunity, right? And so it's how we look at it. Now, don't get me wrong. Yes, we need tools and we need things. We need to be realistic as we look at it. And I'm going to talk about the importance of attitude. But right from the beginning, I want you to understand, I am not talking about a strategy that's just called hope. I'm not just talking about, you need to have a positive attitude, which is basically a denial of reality. No, not at all. But I am telling you that all change and improvement, all transformation always begins with a leader who can see what others can't, who can look at an acorn and see an oak tree in it, who can look at a difficulty and see possibility in it. Someone willing to ask the question, not why can't we do it? They don't ask why or can we do it? Their question is, how can we do it? Like it's already assumed that we're going to be able to do it. We're just trying to figure out the how. We're not questioning, do we have the capability? We know we have the capability. And the greater the challenge, the more likely we're going to bring out the result. Now, another example of this, I always say many times, an acorn turning into an oak tree is a whole lot like every other transition that takes place, right? And many of the transitions that take place in our lives, if you look back and think about all the things that you've learned, gone through, had to go through that were difficult, look at where you are today. It's usually not the times of comfort that you grew. It was usually times of difficulty that you grew, the questions that you had, the thoughts that you had. That's usually where the change really took place. And so one of the things I want to talk about right now is we go from an acorn to an oak tree. And that's usually an individual responsibility. Like for every single one of us here right now, we are thinking about where did I make those transitions? But where we really become significant and all things really begin to change in our life is when we realize that you go from an acorn to an oak tree. But once you're an oak tree, what's inside of you are tons of more acorns. So Jason, if you don't mind bringing up the next slide, if you don't mind bringing up that next slide. So it goes from an acorn to an oak tree. And then that actual oak tree then becomes a forest of oak trees. And so inside one single acorn is not only an oak tree, inside that one single acorn is a whole entire forest of oak trees. So the real question is, how well do we realize what's in our hands? Do you realize what we already have access to? So every single person I work with, every person I lead, every opportunity I have, do I see this in it? Or do I only see where they're at right now? Or do I only see what I'm working with, like it's as if it can't get any better? I asked a group of leaders this recently, and I simply said this. I said, listen, if you received no other resources, if you received no other gifts, if you received no, no more marketing dollars, no more dollars for this, no more labor force, no more people, my question to you is, are you maximizing what's already in your hands? Now, no one's saying we don't need more and could use more. My question, though, again, is, are we maximizing what's already in our hands? I had a coach who told me this one time when my rookie year with the Jets, and he comes up to me and he says, number 18, never called me by my name. He said, number 18, I have a question for you. I said, yes, sir. He goes, I want you to know, you got a ton of potential. And I was like, oh, thank you, coach. That was actually the first nice thing that you said to me. He goes, good. He goes, but I want you to realize, I don't need you to thank me for that. It just means you haven't done anything yet, right? So, but that is not how I'm describing it to the group right now. The emphasis I'm trying to make on is that potential is dormant ability. It's unused success. It's everything that we can be, but we have not yet done. It's everything, or excuse me, that have not yet become. It's everything that we can do, but have not yet done. Potential has no retirement plan. So, but many times potential is like muscle in the body. We don't discover what's possible until it's dealing with resistance, until there's a challenge. And so many times when difficulty shows up, it's not the most talented or the most skilled that determines what happens. It's usually those who take whatever happens and they maximize it for their good. The greatest challenge that leaders have is turning potential into actual performance. That's where the challenge is. Because many times people who are, I always like to say that if potential has some ingredients in it, one ingredient of potential is natural ability and talent. But we've also discovered that the easier it is to be good, the more difficult it can be to be great, right? Because it becomes easy. So instead of looking for greater challenges, we look for comfort. And so one of the things that I'm going to encourage you all to do is to really take time and look at what you already have in your hand, what you're already working with. Because our ultimate goal is to go from an acorn to an oak tree, to change potential into actual performance. Now, Jason, you can come back to me here. There's one other point I want to make before I get into the practical aspects of this, okay? And that is this. An acorn becoming an oak tree, high possibility, no question. There's a high possibility because inside of that acorn is a high possibility. We know what's possible on the inside of acorn, but it is not a high probability. There are millions more acorns than actual oak trees. So it's not a guarantee. There's actual work that it has to be done on purpose, bringing out the potential in ourselves and bringing out the potential in others. We must do on purpose. And so that's what I want to emphasize and discuss now. How do we go from an acorn to an oak tree? How do we ensure that we just won't be walking around with wasted potential? What I mentor, he would remind me often, he says, Eric, one of the worst things to live with is regret. And I said, what do you mean by that? He goes, regret is not what you didn't do that you regret. Usually it's you can't find good reasons to justify why you didn't do it. See, that's what creates the regret. We allow other things to get in the way. And I'm going to talk about those things that get in the way because it has very little to do with competency. I believe every single person on this call, highly competent. But I will tell you, confidence and competence together is powerful. But competence without confidence, all of a sudden, that competence just isn't enough. We need to, it needs to be strengthened with a sense of belief. And that's what we want from our leaders. I say all the time, leaders are dealers in hope. Many times our people's confidence comes from our confidence. If we're not walking with confidence, we can't expect the people around us to have it. I used to have a coach, one of our coaches, he would say he didn't realize how powerful, like like modeling behavior was, right? So he would, at the beginning of the game, he would tell us, he says, hey, okay, guys, we need to have calm intensity. We need to keep our heads. We need to, really be on top of things so our minds can be, in the game. In the first sign of adversity on the sideline, he loses his mind. He's going crazy, screaming, yelling, and then he's wondering why our team was somewhat undisciplined, right? We were modeling his behavior, right? And so one of the things that's important as we walk through this is our goal and our responsibility as leaders is bringing out the best in not only the roles that we have and tasks that we have, but in the people that we lead, okay? And people that we lead. With that being said, I'm going to talk about one other component before I move on to these practical things. Recently, I got a chance to be on a call with a mentor of mine. And on this particular call, he had people who joined the call to honor him. It was amazing, right? It was, and it wasn't just, and my mentor's name is Gilbert. One of my mentors is Gilbert, but it was who got on the call that blew my mind. It was 5 NFL Hall of Famers. Marcus Allen, Tim Brown, Kellen Winslow, Michael Haynes. It was just a number of guys who were Hall of Famers, some of the best ball players you'll ever hear, right? And this isn't a football story in this, but hear me. What was so powerful about it is not one time when they got on the call did they talk about my mentor in reference to how he played. The whole time they spent their time referencing his character. They talked about how it didn't matter the circumstance or situation, that he was the same authentic leader he was when people were watching and when nobody was around. And what moved my mentor so much is when he said to me, he goes, Eric, you never know when people are watching. He goes, it's amazing. I was hearing stories that I don't remember because I wasn't paying attention that way, but they saw it. And the fact that none of the conversations were about football and they were all about character and the impact. He had one player who got on the call who said right from the beginning, he goes, what was amazing to me is Gil and the impact he had on my life as a leader had nothing to do with his playing. With him coaching me up in football. And he goes, what do you mean? He goes, yes, of course he held the standards high. He did all that. But what moved me so much is he had a philosophy, which was simply this. When I coached a player, he says, I coached a man and the player will follow. That was his rule. I do what's best for the man and then the player will follow. Here's what I discovered for a lot of organizations. The organizations who spend time trying to help their people become better employees, they usually get stuck. But the organizations who work hard to make sure their employees become better people, they thrive. They're able to handle adversity when it hits, all the things that are taking place now. There are companies who were being incredibly successful, but they were being successful because of circumstance. But there's now a ton of companies who are rising to the top. Why? Because it's not that, difficulties haven't hit them as well, but they've equipped their people to be able to adapt, to be flexible, to adjust, to realize there's different ways we got to get things done. So here's one of the things that I want to point out. If you can put up the next slide for me, Jason. So now we're going to get a little more practical of how do we maximize in terms of leading in this new reality. How do we turn an acorn into an oak tree? The first slide is if you go to the next one, is why don't we change? Why do people get stuck? And I want this slide to stay up for a second in terms of leading in a new reality. Look what it says. It says, we're okay just the way that we are. That is an attitude. It's a mindset. There was a gentleman who said it this way. He says, in times of change, his name was Eric Hoffer. He said, in times of change, learners inherit the earth, while the learned, the know-it-alls, are beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists. The way I like to state it this way, it's a dangerous time to be a know-it-all. Right now, our leaders need to be learn-it-alls. Because every time you continue learning, you find new ways to add new value. But if you're ever stuck in your ways, man, as the quote says, you're beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists. That's why your title of this is so good, Leadership in a Post-Pandemic World. The pre-pandemic world is no longer the case. Now, are the same fundamentals necessary? Without question. The basics, we all know the basics. But we do need to keep learning and adjusting. One of my mentors used to say it this way. He says, Eric, it's okay to coast, because I used to complain about him constantly telling me I needed to change or need to improve. And I was like, isn't it okay to coast? And he was like, yeah, it is okay to coast. But keep this in mind. In order to coast, you must be going downhill. Okay. And so that's one of the things that we want to make sure we're not doing. Jason, you can bring it back to me. One of the things I'm going to ask you all to do, if you are a football fan, don't need to be, but if you are a football fan, I want you to think about what's one thing, there might be 18 different things, but if you're a football fan, what's one thing that your team that you're a fan of does that drive you crazy, right? And when I ask this question, one of the things I hear a lot from individuals is this: when they're aggressive all game, they do everything to get to lead, and then they start playing what's called prevent defense. They start playing not to lose. They start getting complacent. Instead of still pushing hard and being aggressive, they start being careful. Now, here's the thing I will tell you when it comes to this. Keep in mind, our goal isn't to play prevent defense. Our goal is to continuously keep learning and growing. Here's the reason. There was one particular group I worked with for a number of years. The feedback they received from their clients is they continue to exceed expectations. Then in the last 2 years, their feedback started to be, we're only meeting expectations, yet everybody was working just as hard. This year, guess what? They're not even meeting expectations, even though they're working just as hard. And one of them looked at me and said, Eric, what do we do? I said, well, what you're experiencing is what we call, the new definition of mediocrity, which is meeting expectations. Now, you're working hard, which is fine, but are you, and here is my question for him, I ask this of every leader, but are you learning as hard as you're working? I will tell you, this is a time where we got to be more curious. We got to ask more questions. We got to use other strengths. We got to talk more. We got to collaborate in ways we've never collaborated before. Welcome to this new reality. Many times the answers to these problems are closer to the problem. So get comfortable with it. But these days of I have the answer, I'm going to sit here and tell you what to do are pretty much over. I was dealing with one group recently. It was like, man, I'm leading this generation of groups. Back in the day, I used to tell people I led, you better do this or else. He goes, I'm now working with a generation who sits there and goes, so let's discuss what else looks like, right? I mean, times have actually changed. And so as we're progressing, that attitude, remember this, leaders are learners. Leaders are learners. More importantly, leaders are teachers. But leaders learn, then they teach. I always say one of the best processes to keep things in mind is learn, practice, then teach. And that allows everybody to continue growing. One of the greatest challenges too often for leaders is if you stop growing as a leader, it is very dangerous because everything rises and falls on leadership. Hopefully this example makes sense. On a scale of 1 to 10, if a leader is a 5 and they stop growing, they eventually become very uncomfortable leading anything except for 4s and 3s. And so because 4s and 3s, those 4s and 3s, they only get comfortable with leading 1s and 2s. And instead of the company growing, you notice, even though there's a ton of potential, what stops the growth? There's one particular leader or a few particular leaders somewhere who just stopped their leadership journey. They stopped growing. When everybody keeps growing, when I'm a leader and I grow from a 5 to a 6 to a 7, I've created more space for the people that I'm actually leading to do the same thing. So the mindset of growth, the desire to continuously grow is the key. I talked about an acorn growing into an oak tree. one of the ways that an acorn grows in an oak tree is an acorn never getting satisfied. Once it's in the ground, that's what it does. I actually asked, when I here in Fort Collins, there's a beautiful oak tree on the campus of Colorado State University. And I asked somebody who really understands how all things grow. And I was so impressed because this oak tree is gorgeous. It's full bloom and it was in the spring. And I said, man, that is so beautiful. What a beautiful tree. He goes, yes, but that's not what's so impressive. I was like, well, isn't it growing strong right now because of it being outside? I mean, in this wonderful location in the spring. He goes, no, actually, what's more impressive about this tree is it's over 300 something years old. Not only that, its greatest times of growth is during the winters. The fact that it survived 300 Colorado winters is what's impressive, not how great it looks in the spring. It's because of the winter that it looks so great in the spring. I said, help me understand. He says, because during the winter, its growth has to go down, not up. Its root structure has to find ways to survive because of the difficulty. He goes, that's what's so valuable and amazing about this oak tree. We're appreciating it now, but its growth happened then. And then it reminded me of one of my coaches who would often say, he goes, remember guys, champions, they are made in the dark, but they're celebrated in the light. And so what leaders do when no one's looking, when leaders are constantly working on their own development and their own growth, man, when it's time to shine, they will. But one of the things that's important is, you have a phrase that says, be ready so you don't get ready. Look, the problem with being in leadership sometimes is, look, the truth will reveal itself. When the pressure shows up, the truth always reveals itself. Am I equipped? Am I prepared? More importantly, how's the relationship I have with those I lead? When the difficulty arises, do we come together or do people jump ship? Do people bail? And this is why our own individual growth as leaders is so important. It gives space for the people who are with us and connected with us to keep growing as well. And there's nothing like it. Now, that's that. Now I'm going to give you these other few PowerPoint slides. So Jason, if you pull up the next slide. I don't believe anyone who's on this call today is struggling with an attitude of complacency. But this next one is big: fear of the unknown. Another way I like to say is fear of the future. This many times can get in the way of an acorn becoming an oak tree, or a person being able to release their potential or transition potential into performance. It's fear of the unknown. It's been said that people will choose unhappiness over uncertainty. They'd rather be unhappy and certain about it versus move towards what they really want while going through uncertainty. Now, there is no question in the place that we're living in today, and based on what so many of us have had to endure, there is some serious concerns about fear. You can come back to me, Jason, we can be fine. There are some issues in relationship to how powerful, how strong fear is. But I will tell you, leaders, right now, what we need more than anything is just not more chief executive officers. I do a lot of coaching. I said, what we need more right now is more chief courage officers, right? We need more leaders who are showing enough courage to help us lead through such uncertainty. When I say leading in a new reality, it's not a reality that's very clear. Sometimes it's a little cloudy. And I heard, I did a lot of work with USAA Insurance and General Robles, as well as our U.S. Army Rangers. And General Robles, the funny line he would often say is, he says, Eric, if you walk in the general's tent and he's crying, then everybody's in trouble, right? And so it's really important to keep in mind how important it is. Every leader I'm speaking with, your confidence is, your belief to those that you lead. Now, I'm not talking about a made up confidence. I'm not talking about, this, just having a, optimistic or positive attitude while denying reality. Not what I'm saying, but the way that we move fear of the future into confidence in the future, the way we move fear of the unknown into confidence into the known is by being clear. Let me say that again. I'm going to say the greatest thing, especially during times of change that we're dealing with leaders, is to be as clear as possible with your team, with those you lead, even with yourself. Clarity is king. Now, using it in a football term, I don't care how talented a football team is, how talented the 11 players are. If the quarterback gets in the huddle and says, just get open, there's going to be problems. I don't care how talented they are. And so it's very important that clarity wins out. I've never seen a highly productive, highly effective, confused ball player. I've never seen a highly effective, confused employee. I've never seen a highly effective, confused anything. If you're confused, confusion diminishes effectiveness. Many times we get angry at people not doing their job because we know they have the talent to do it. What we don't always ask is, do they actually know what to do? Do they have a clear picture of what better looks like? And leaders, that is one of our primary responsibilities, is getting clear about what better looks like. So I'm going to give you a few things. It's not a slide. I'm just going to ask you to write these down. These are just 5 things that help a leader create clarity with those that they lead, okay? Number 1, you need to be clear about what it is you want. So number 1 is what? What do we want? What do I want? However you want to put that. So what do we want? Now I learned this from General Robles at USA Insurance. Those of you who are on the call who've served in the military or been involved, you know what this is called. This is called commander's intent, right? And it's such a powerful thing. So you have to have clarity, and clarity begins with, being clear about what we want. Number 2 is being clear about why we want it. Now, I will tell you this, leaders, especially in this new reality we're living in, this right here gets missed often. This right here. We spend a lot of time talking about what it is we want. We don't spend as much time talking about why we want it. I want you to understand the what is what we're going after. The why is critical. It helps us understand the reason for it. I always like to say the why is like, it gives us why power. It helps us be in on things. It is a dangerous thing for people to know what to do, but don't really know why they're doing it. And then and then the third one, which is important, number 3, is how to do it. Okay. But in parentheses next to how, I want you to write the words flexible. Now, just to give you a quick illustration of how these three work together, we're clear about what we want. We spent time really talking about why we want it. And then we got to the how, but we had to be flexible. So I asked General Robles, after he gave me the first 2, it made sense, but I said, General Robles, why are you being so flexible on the how? And he gave me a great statement. He just says, it's simple. In the military, we realize something. I said, what's that? He goes, the enemy gets a vote. he goes, in everything, remember this, Eric, the marketplace gets a vote. The economy gets a vote. The weather gets a vote. All these things that get a vote. Now, what we do is we get so locked onto the how and we did not spend enough time on the why. So if you don't spend enough time on the why and people don't really understand why, when the enemy gets a vote or other circumstances get a vote, and then you ask your people to change how they're doing it, they have pushed back against it. They get mad. Well, you told me to do this, and now you're telling me to do that, because they've so much locked on to what it is they were trying to do and how to do it that they skip why they were doing it in the first place. The why has to win out. And when people understand the why, it makes them more strategic. They realize there's a chance we might have to adjust how we're going about it to accomplish the actual goal. How we're doing it is a means to an end. It's not the end. And so we want to make sure that we really bring our people together we're aligned when we know what it is we want, why we want, and how we're going to do it, and we're flexible there. But the other 2 points, number 4, is the benefits of getting it. Like what's the benefits of accomplishing this? And then the 5th one, which is most critical, is the cost of an action. What will it cost us if we don't get it done? The reason that 5th one is so important, it creates urgency. And to every leader I'm speaking to right now, there's a time when you can sit down with your team and people around and they know what to do. You've talked about why to do it. You've talked about how we're going to do it and be flexible. But the one thing that many times gets missed out is the urgency of getting it done. Pace is everything. It's not moving in a hurry just with no plan, but it does require some pace. We're functioning in a day and time right now is that the companies who survive, the organizations who thrive are the ones, not the largest. It's not no longer, we're past the days of the big eating the small. It's now the fast eating the slow. And if the things on the outside of you are moving faster than you're adjusting on the inside, you're already in trouble. So I ask leaders to always ask your folks, very simple principle, very simple rule. You get clarity, you see these 5 things. This is so simple, right? But you'll be amazed if you just sit back and sometimes sit back and ask your team, okay, guys, what matters most? Okay, guys, what are we trying to do? And listen to the answers and find out, do their answers match what your thought or your plan is? I'm here. I say this to leaders and those who communicate all the time. If our pitches don't match, we're not aligned. And so you got to ask your people, tell me what you heard, tell me what you see, tell me what, so you can make sure that what you communicated and what they understand go together. I say this to leaders often. What you say is not as important as what they understand. So work everything in your power to make sure that it saves you so much time. There's so much waste because of miscommunication that can be solved with the 2 or 3 additional minutes, just making sure we're lined up in the same place. When the quarterback calls the play, we go out of huddle, everybody knows what to do. Now you got something special. And I'm telling you, an aligned team with average talent will crush a highly talented, dynamic team whose communication and alignment isn't. I mean, it works like that, right? I'm not the biggest Tom Brady fan, but I just because of frustration because he keeps winning. But but part of the reason is he gets his offense and his team so aligned. Everybody's on the same page. Everybody knows what their job is. And he spends as much time doing that as the other quarterbacks. They spend all their time just on the practice field throwing the ball around. Everything isn't equal. Last point I'm making then. I want to make this sure this is clear. Everything isn't equal. Unfortunately, there's a lot of things that don't match. Oh, yes, Natalie, I see this. I'm going to say those 5 points one more time. So point number 1, what we want. What is it that we want? So we want to be clear about what we want. Number 2 is why we want it. And if you can put at least a asterisk next to number 2 or some kind of star, just to remind yourself to have that conversation. And then not only ask that, sometimes ask your folks, okay, again, why are we doing this? And that'll help you know that strategically you guys are on the same page. Number 3, we get into how we're going to do it. But number 3, we want to be flexible. Number 4 is the benefits that we receive when we accomplish it. And number 5 is the cost of inaction. What will it cost us if we don't do it, if we don't reach it? And that's what helps lead to the urgency, okay? And so that's how we help overcome the fear of the future, is by making the future clear. Oh, you're welcome, ma'am. Is by making the future clear, by making the unknown known. Now, last point I make before we get to our last 2 slides. In regards to this of overcoming the fear of the unknown from a personal standpoint, and I'm challenging each of you leaders to do it from a personal standpoint. This is the most selfless thing that you can do, not selfish, but selfless thing that you can do. The same way each of you have your strategic planning session or session every year, like you did something strategic to plan for 2021. You probably know what your quarterly key performance indicators are, or your objectives for the year. You go through all that process. You do it for the purpose of ensuring you get a return on your investment. Why? Because your time, your energy, your labor is limited. So you got to make sure you get a return on all of that. I'm going to actually raise the bar on you and challenge you to also, just like you have clarity about your organization's objectives and stuff, I need you to have your own strategic plan, your personal one. So you get return on energy. And when I say return on energy is your life, because that's all you have to get. So how do I ensure that I get a return on energy? I ask this of leaders all the time. In 12 months, you're going to arrive. The question is where? Are you individually going to arrive at a designed destination or an undesigned destination? It is critical that you arrive at a at a design destination. I had one person say to me recently, he said, Eric, I don't know if I want to do a whole lot of goal setting for 2021 because 2020 is clearly, it didn't turn out the way that I anticipated. I was like, no, I got you. I said, but let me ask you this. Do you think that 2021 is going to turn out well for you on accident? Right? You think that, what I've noticed is things don't just necessarily work that way. Like I will tell you, like everything that looks great in my yard, I had to do on purpose. I never planted a weed in my life, but they tend to grow. All right. So I will tell you, just like you have to be the architect of your yard, you got to be the architect of your life. And so if you have a clear understanding of your organization's strategic plan, then you do your own strategic plan. That is a problem. That is a problem because you have the people depending on you whose lives, not just at work, but I'm talking about those who are going to guarantee going to be at your funeral, which is your family and those close to you. Okay. You got to make sure you're taking care of you to take care of that. Because when you're doing that, when you got clarity about your own personal goals and ambitions, you're better at work. That doesn't take away from work. It actually makes you better. It gives your life even greater context. So certain things that shouldn't worry you to death won't, because there's a perspective you have on it. You realize that, I say this to leaders all the time. There's something probably stressing you out 3 weeks ago. But if I ask you what was it, it's hard to remember, right? Because it's not the things that stress you out. It's stress has become habitual, right? Like stress is the habit, worry is the habit, not the problems that create worry. No, they're always going to be around you. Those are going to be going on all the time. What you got to do is equip yourself to be able to look at things in the proper way. And what helps you do that is when you have clear goals yourself. Like when you know, what does it look like for you? What matters most to you? And when you know that's there, it makes a difference. And for those of you who haven't done or wrote your goals down or decide what you want, it's as simple as, if I can identify 5 things, 10 things that I want to see happen for me in 2021. And remember, it's you writing this, you're painting a picture, but it doesn't have to be a self-portrait. For some people, it's not enough motivation to just do something for myself. Many times the motivation goes, who in my family or in my life can I make a difference for, right? That's great energy, that fuels you, but you need to have that clarified. The reason why I emphasize clarity, last point, and then I'll move on to the next slide. The reason why I emphasize this one right here, fear of the unknown. Fear, the word fear is an emotion. It's an anticipation of danger. It creates hesitation, and it creates such a hesitation that you can hesitate so long that not moving will feel normal. That's not normal. We were built to grow. We were made to keep growing. Do you know as human beings are the only creatures on the planet that without interruption, I say it this way, who can make a conscious choice not to get any better? Totally. We got all the potential in the world. Our possibilities are like, even researchers who will say, we got as much potential, we got enough potential to last 100 lifetimes. Yet we are content to just be average, mediocre, okay. I always like to say it this way. My wife and I have been married over 25 years, but early on in the marriage, I was really struggling. And instead of figuring out how to get better, I had a better plan. I would just call my buddies, have them grab their wives, and we'll all go on a group date. So my wife could realize how bad it could have been if she would have married one of them. Right? So instead of trying to get better, I was like, no, let's just hang out with other people who are worse. Right? And I'm bringing this up because every single time we make choices of where we want to go or where we want to grow, the impact of our growth, it doesn't just impact us. Every time you reach some of your individual goals, remember, you're not an island to yourself. You're an oak tree, and inside of that oak tree are more acorns. Now those acorns now have a model to see. So all of a sudden, everything starts growing. This is why I would tell leaders, when you grow and you unleash more and more your potential, it's not a selfish act. It's one of the most selfless acts that you can do, because you are a walking example of what's possible. And I'm not talking about stuff that people write in magazines about or books, or it has to be. No, I'm talking about in our own worlds that we exist in the era we have impact in. Man, sometimes it's just nice. Do you know what it's like to have a leader who's goal oriented and a goal setter, and then your leader comes and asks you, and you work for them, and they say, hey, what's your plans for this year? What's your goals for this year? Just the fact that I got a leader who asked me questions about that leads me to then going and doing it. And then, once a month, they just go, hey, I'm just checking out. How's your goals coming? Do you know how powerful that is? And it's so simple, but it's life-changing. But it becomes life-changing when the leaders themselves are using the same information. I always say there's nothing more influential than being inspired, follow this here, by what I call an inspired practitioner. I'm being inspired by somebody who actually practices what they're talking about. Nothing more powerful than that. Okay, so how do we overcome our fear of the unknown? By making the unknown known. How do we do it for our teams too? By being as clear as possible. We get clarity. This is what we're wanting to do. This is why we're wanting to do it. This is how we're going to do it, but we got to be flexible. Why? Because new information will come where we need to adjust. But we're not adjusting what we're trying to do, and we're not adjusting why it's important. We're just adjusting our methods, knowing that there's a million different methods to be able to do it. There's somebody listening to you right now. One of your goals you may write down is, I want to be in better physical health here in 2021. That might be one of your goals. That's what you want to do. But then go a little further. Why do you want to do it? And you start identifying the why that you want to do it. All of a sudden, you're mentioning your kids or your spouse, your friends, and your grandchildren, and what you get to see and what you want to experience. Well, all of a sudden, the why starts getting really strong. Guess what that why did? It strengthened your desire for what it is you're going after. That's why I call why power. It gives you not willpower, but why power. Many people are trying to will themselves to do it. No, spend time thinking about the reasons why you want to do it. Then all of a sudden, the power comes in. But how to do it? No, you don't have to. My way is going to the gym and lift the weights. And somebody goes, well, what about cardio? I just lift the weights faster. Right? But for somebody else, it could be yoga. It could be in their garden. It can be going for a walk with their dog. The methods to get to where we want to go are endless. We just get so bogged down into the how that we don't see all the other possibilities to be able to get there. This is why that conversation and those 5 steps are so important. Okay, if you go to the next slide for me, Jason, thank you. Just a few more minutes, guys, on these slides, and then we'll do some Q&A. So there's a fear. Okay, here's the next one, the fear of failure. This also gets in our way of us being able to release all of our potential. And these kind of work together. So fear of failure. Okay, now, when I talk about fear of failure, and you can bring it back to me, Jason, if that's okay. I think everybody can write that note down. When I talk about fear of failure, okay, when we talk about the fear of failure, keep in mind of the word that I said. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and say this here. I just talked about the fear of the unknown. Now I'm talking about the fear of failure. Failure, I like to call failures reps. It's like if I'm in the gym lifting weights, and they say, keep going till failure. The best way to build my strength and to build my muscle is to push until I can't push anymore. Now, once I can't push anymore, it doesn't mean I won't one day be able to do it. It just means I finally understood where the zone ends. What happens for a lot of us is we never get to the place of failure because of our fear of failure. So we stay so close inside of our comfort zones that we never experience everything that we really want. Now, here's the reason I'm bringing this up. Many of the goals we identify, the things we really want, are not inside of our comfort zone. They're usually outside of our comfort zones. And so we got to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And the biggest challenge with dealing with failure is the fear of it. Many times, I always say, man, it isn't funny how I wish we could stay like little kids, right? Because, if you ask a little kid, how many times did you fall down before you learned how to run? They never counted that. I mean, they were just like, they forgot all the reps necessary. Now they just run everywhere. But for something happens as we continue to grow in age, we start to attach failure with identity. That if I fail at a task, that means I'm a failure. No, that just means there's some new learning I got to do. If I failed at the relationship, that means a failure. No, that it just means, do better in your selection process. Maybe, some things you have to learn about yourself. If we start identifying all the different failures in our life, the question isn't, did we fail? The question is, did you quit? There's so often, I always say, somebody says, hey, winning's a habit. It is. But winning's a habit primarily of persistence, not because of super talent. Losing is a habit, but not because of lack of talent, but because of the habit of quitting. We quit so soon, way too soon. And many times when we quit before we even took the risk, because we play out these scenarios in our head so often of what's going to happen if, what's going to happen when. And we do it to such a degree that what we desired, we stop desiring it. Well, I really didn't want it that bad. Actually, you did. It's just the obstacle of fear, or the obstacle of embracing failure, is what we got to move past. Now, when I talk about leading in this new reality and how does this make it practical, listen, when I said the fast are now eating the slow, when I say the fast are eating the slow, let me make it very practical where they're faster at. They're fast at trying something, failing, and then getting feedback and course correcting. They're failing faster. They're failing more often. It's just they've redefined failure. Instead of being something you got to hide, it's something you actually use. And now follow this here. And that's usually dictated by the leaders themselves. I can always tell the attitude of a leader when I'm doing a lot of consulting with leadership teams. I can always tell the leader's attitude about failure based on many times the team's attitude about failure. If they use failures as learning moments, oh, that's special. But if they spend a lot of time either trying to cover up or keep it quiet or making sure everything's perfect before they present to their peers, I'm like, you don't have that kind of time in this day and age. We got to move faster than that. We got to be in this room bouncing ideas, bouncing back and forth, going back and forth to actually get better. So I learned this from a sergeant major who I respect tremendously. But it was amazing. And again, it's not the specific situation, it's the mindset that I want you all to grasp on this. At this one particular base I was doing work with, the commanding officer and the sergeant major, commanding officer who ran the whole base, and the sergeant major who was in charge of all the enlisted men, anytime their soldiers would be, I would say, on their second strike, one more strike, they'd be dishonorably discharged. They had to sit down with the commanding officer and the sergeant major. The sergeant major, as I'm talking about failure here, as I'm talking to this group, he tells me this story. He says, Eric, we were losing 9 out of every 10 soldiers who came and sat down in front of us, which we felt was unacceptable because being dishonorably discharged is hard to come back from that. I said, okay. He says, in the next year, we started retaining, we were saving 8 out of every 10. And I was like, yes, sir. Sir, how did you do that? Did you guys lower the standard? Did you drop the requirement that was accountability not the same? He says, actually, we did none of that. We changed absolutely nothing. He said, I just did one thing. I was like, what was that, Sergeant Major? He says, I finally told the truth. I did. I said, whoa, what? He goes, I sat there and realized that every single time these guys were sitting there, when I told them what they had to do or else, they had no picture that there was life after a mistake. Many of them couldn't imagine being able to come back from this until I told them the truth, which was, I also had sat in that same chair, that I had a substance abuse problem, that I did. He goes, I finally used my own failures to be tuition, to be used as learning for the people I'm leading. He goes, I realized, I was like, is that all you did? He goes, the reason is, Eric, if they can look at the sergeant major and know and look at me and go, I had those same mistakes. I had those same issues. And I was able to show you that there's life after a mistake. It gave them the energy. It gave them the confidence that they needed. They just needed to see a picture that there was life out of a mistake. And it hit me so strongly where I've been telling leaders all the time, especially as a father and a husband, a friend, whatever. Here's what I realized too often. And I get amnesia. I forget all the mistakes I've made, right? Especially when I'm talking to others. Like, I forget, man, I was a problem, right? Like I had issues. And the fact that I can sit here today meant that there's life after mistakes. Sometimes we just need to do it. I say to leaders all the time, listen, your successes, use it for your confidence. Your success, use for your confidence. Your failures, use them for your people's confidence. Because of where you sit, when they get a chance to hear what you've overcome and what you went through and what you had to deal with, and then they get to see that, wow, I'm not alone. Man, the problem with failure many times, it feels so isolating. You feel like you're by yourself. My mentor used to say all the time, he goes, if at first you don't succeed, join the crowd, right? It helped, right? Okay. Now, last point I make about this failure piece is I needed to hear, I heard his story. And recently, I got a chance to use one of my biggest failures I felt in my playing days. I played in the NFL, but more importantly, I was in the NFL. I played with the Jets. I played with the Packers, and I got cut each time. And then I had for one short, brief period, I was in San Diego. In between the Jets and the Packers, I was in San Diego. And while I was there, something happened to me that was just difficult, right? Which is I got cut. I got released, and the best way to say this to those listening, I got promoted to fan. So I went from player, and I got promoted to fan, right? But here was the challenge. I got cut, and because of some confusion with administration or communication, nobody told me. So I spent a whole day in team meetings, out on the field, doing stuff, wondering why I wasn't in there, wondering why I didn't see my name, but still sat there. I had every coach, no, one of them looks me in the eye because it's not their job to tell me, right? So something happened in there. And then finally, somebody let the head coach know, because I kept asking, I was like, hey, coach, I don't really see my name here. Yeah. And then finally, our head coach brings me in, and he apologized. He said, but man, I apologize, man. Mistake. You should have known that. Well, it's not only getting cut, not only failing, but I've said to many people, failure is tough, but public failure is really tough, right? Okay. And it creates almost like, I never want to touch that again. Like, I never want to put myself in position to do that again. And so I still remember my drive home. And on that drive home, I was like, I will do anything except for being in position where something like that can happen to me again. I am so grateful that I had people speak into my life who had failures at that time and didn't tell me about all their successes. I had a couple mentors who said at the time, I was like, oh yeah, that was bad. And they weren't trying to they was like, hey, believe me, you will make it. You will use this. He goes, here's the thing. We will figure out in time how this has happened for you and not just to you. How you're going to grow from this. You're not going to grow. You're not going to shrink from it. And my father used to say all the time, I used to say, dad with experiences, the older you get, I guess you get wiser. He goes, no, son, you don't. He goes, unfortunately, there's a lot of people with a whole lot of experience, but they don't necessarily get better. Many times they get bitter. The only way you get better is if you reflect upon that experience. And so when I had a chance to reflect upon what happened when I got cut that way, I'm so grateful, because that was my biggest fear when I started doing what I'm doing right now. I would not be speaking to you all right now unless I had people around me who helped me get over that fear of being a public failure again. It was like the worst thing ever. 2 weeks ago, I get a phone call from a young man I've had the chance to mentor who's basically went through the same thing. And to be able to talk him through and truly empathize and share the story, and to see note from him later and get a phone call with tears later, that how much it meant that he wasn't alone, only to discover there was even more people around him. I bring this up and I say this, we're moved and we like hearing people's success stories, and that is true. But what creates so much common ground between all of us is our failures. It's amazing how much we all have in common. And so instead of fearing our failures, we need to use them more often. That really brings us together and asks us to go forward. And leaders, the best thing you can do is go first sometimes with that, by sharing your story, because you're already sitting in a position that shows them there's life after a mistake. That's the beautiful thing. I say all the time, anytime Michael Jordan came to a gym, if Michael Jordan came to the gym and spent all his time talking about, man, I hit this shot against so-and-so, we'll start looking at him sideways, because we all saw that. Clearly, you're Michael Jordan. But when Michael Jordan came to the gym, and then he started talking about when somebody misses a shot, even in playing pickup ball, and he goes, man, don't worry about it, bro. I've missed a ton. It just, everybody felt uplifted because, man, if he goes through that, then there's hope for me. Leaders, this is why I call you. You all are all dealers of hope. But what you use to create the hope, many times are things that not everybody expected. It was your compassion. It was your empathy. It was your vulnerability to use your story to help others. Last one, if you put up the last slide, and then we do get in the Q&A, Jason. This last slide is the last one, and I like to call it fear of rejection. Fear of rejection. This is of all the things, this is what can really get in our way of unleashing our fullest potential. Okay. Now, follow us here. Here's the question I have for you, and some of you can put your answers in the chat function, but the question is this: what does it feel like to be wrong? I want that to resonate. What does it feel like to be wrong? Jason, you can bring me back if you would. Okay. So what does it feel like to be wrong? I like it, Michelle. It sucks. Yes. Yes, small. Yes, Jason. Frustrating. Oh, yuck. Oh, everyone, you were, I don't like it, terrible. You feel, how did I miss it? Embarrassing. All the different answers, you guys are getting everything. It does, all right? But here's what I'm gonna add one component to this and follow the subtlety of this. Every one of your answers are accurate, but I would say somewhat incomplete for this reason. What you told me was not just what it felt like to be wrong. What you told me is what it felt like when you discovered you were wrong. My question to you is, how long did you go being wrong before you found out? I say to leaders this, and for myself even, that being wrong isn't the challenge. The question is, how long do we go being wrong? That's why one of the things we can't fear as leaders is any form of rejection. Follow this here. Because rejection, which is a self-esteem issue, it causes us many times to not ask for or not reach out for the feedback we need to course correct. And leaders in this new reality, because things are going so much faster, guess what collapses time? Feedback. I say to leaders all the time, you're going to work hard anyways. So you might as well work hard with good information. But if you're hesitant to hear what that information may be, what it does is it causes us to work hard. And then we get upset if our working hard doesn't match or exceed expectations. But many times it's hard to exceed expectations when the expectations weren't clear in the first place. I asked my wife this, and guys, and men and women, but I'm especially talking to the husbands on the call right now. I asked this question and I try to time it perfectly. Okay, so I would say I ask my wife for feedback all the time. No, not really. Sometimes I'm pretty selective of when, right? But the question is simply this: I asked my wife. I said, "Honey, scale of 1 to 10, how would you say I'm serving you right now, treating you with significance?" Now, I promise you that's an open-ended question, but I did ask for a number. And I, when I'm doing okay, I hear about a 6, 6, 7. When I really know I'm in trouble is when she asks me back, she goes, "How do you think you're doing?" Now I know I'm in trouble. Right? But the value of the question isn't, okay, it's a 6. I don't ask next, why is it a 6? Because there can be 8 million reasons why it's a 6. More importantly, even if I solve those reasons as a 6, it still doesn't make it a 10. And that's one of the things I want every leader and every person to understand. What makes somebody happy or fulfilled isn't the same. Like what makes somebody unhappy, in the absence of what makes them unhappy, doesn't make them fulfilled. They're not the same thing. And that is always a hard thing. So if I hear somebody who's dissatisfied, okay, and they tell me why they're dissatisfied, we fix that problem. If you then assess them again, they don't turn around and give you an 8 or a 9 because that doesn't exist. It just brings them back to neutral. The real question that I ask my wife is this: honey, what would make it a 10? Now, the reason I ask that information and the reason it's so critical is, again, I'm going to work hard anyways. So I might as well work hard with as much good information as possible. Also, so leaders, I tell leaders all the time the same point. Listen, you all work really, really hard, but to be working hard with inaccurate information, your time is so much more valuable than that. Your life is way much more valuable. So ask for feedback and then also get good at giving proper feedback. It's one thing to be uninformed. It's another thing to be misinformed. The worst thing you can ever do, because being misinformed is deceptive. And so if somebody's not doing a good job, how long do you go without letting them know? I shouldn't find out on my annual performance review that I'm struggling in an area, and you've been knowing this for 6 months. I wasted 6 months. This is why I say all the time that, the worst run NFL franchises still ran better than 99% of organizations in the world. I've said that everywhere in the world, and people are looking at me crazy. They're like, are you kidding me? There's like, please. I was like, no, I understand. It's not because the NFL, not because we're smarter. It's not because of our selection process. All you gotta do is watch the news, right? It's none of those things. But it's all because of one thing and one thing only: video cameras. Because our feedback is frequent and it's informal, and it's correct. We don't talk about intentions. We only review what actually got done. So when the feedback happens faster, you can course correct faster. So can you create opportunities with you and your teams to do the feedback faster? And the best way to do that is informally. So yes, it sucks to be wrong, but it really sucks to be wrong when I could have been right 6 months ago, when I've been taking this action, and this person doesn't even like it, right? Yet I keep doing it. It's like, and I say this across the board, just the willingness, the humility, and the vulnerability that goes along for a leader to ask for feedback. There's nothing more powerful, because when a leader's asking for feedback from their team, even about their own performance, it creates an environment that allows other people to receive it. It creates a reciprocity in the atmosphere. And leading in this new reality that we're going in, we got to do these things faster. So ego or fear or all those kinds of, I always say, super high ego and low self-esteem. Those are like, those are two sides of the same coin, right? They're just, they're both problems. I think of myself as completely pitiful, or I think of myself as like, I do nothing wrong. Both of those are just, they're just foolish. But the humility that comes in the middle with strong authority, confidence in knowing who you are, and at the same time, a whole lot of vulnerability, man, that just creates an environment where everybody can thrive, because we're course correcting with good information. And sometimes the information we don't always like, but it does enhance us, okay? So anyhow, I want to make sure we got some chances for some Q&A, Jason. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to you and answer questions that maybe may come in.
Yeah,
and
so
I all questions too if necessary.
yeah, Eric, that was a fantastic discussion. Thank you so much for that. And I took an entire sheet of notes here, and yeah, I hope everybody else did too. I mean, that was great. You really got my mind, racing about how we can, interpret this into our daily lives and not only be better people ourselves, but better for our communities too. So thank you for that. It's just remarkable. So that being said, we will open this up for questions. We have about 5 minutes here. So does anybody have any questions? We got some feedback from Jason Comstock, liking, quote, Dealers of Hope. That's
Awesome.
good too. Yep. Any other questions or comments? Or I think we had a question that was emailed out actually before, and I just wanted to read this while people are thinking of other questions. But the question was, the pandemic was an incredible challenge for our country, all the way down to small businesses, and it was made even more difficult by leaders that focused more on their agenda than the pandemic itself. How can any smaller organizations insulate themselves from adverse effects of this happening again?
Oh, great. That is a fantastic question. Now, that's a challenging question. So when you say insulate yourself, I don't know if that's possible, right? To insulate yourself. But I will say, I used the analogy already of the oak tree. and not to extend this too long, but follow this out. One of the greatest things that we can do is send our roots deeper. We have to. So give you an example, they did this controlled environment where I forget the place, but hundreds of millions of dollars they spent in doing it. They brought every single thing from a biosphere, from an environmental standpoint. You had a mini desert in there. They had a rainforest in there. They had all these animals in there. They had trees. They had all this stuff. And what shocked them was the tree at the highest, all the trees would grow to a certain height and then die off. And they couldn't figure out why the trees were dying. And then they discovered the reason the trees were dying. They missed one element in that controlled environment, which was wind. And because of the wind, it's called stress wood. And so because of the wind, the tree's roots would go deeper at a necessity. But without any wind blowing, those trees would go to a certain height, but then die off. What I've been like encouraging leaders, especially small business, of which I am, I've been like, okay, where do I need to dig my roots even deeper? Where do I have to, in the areas that I asked the question earlier, what do we have in control over, and are we maximizing that? And so when I think about my client base and my customers and my relationships with them, how can I serve them even better to make those relationships deeper? Not just to get more, but to survive the inevitable winds that are going to come back again. What just happened was a storm. But storms are going to come. So the key is, how do we equip ourselves to ensure? So we got to dig our roots deeper in all the practical ways. I'm talking about with the teams that we lead, I would say it this way, Jason, which I think is very important, and this is big. We got to maximize the intelligence of the teams we're already working with. And the way you maximize the intelligence, you got to let more people be in on the problem solving. We have to get problem solving higher. So I say it this way: if you are solving problems for the people who are reporting to you or reporting to them, everybody is solving problems at a level beneath their job description. We have to have everybody step up. So the problems that people are solving need to be at their job description or higher. And the days of just do your job and don't have any connection to everybody are over, because we got to be linked up, because storms are inevitable. There's going to be more storms coming. And you are right about agendas. It's hard for me to even watch the news, right? Like, I don't watch anything. And it's not that I don't want to be informed. It's just, I got to work hard not to be distracted by the things I can't influence. Stephen Covey said it best: you got your circle of concern and circle of influence. And if you allow your circle of concern to blind you from your circle of influence, you're already in trouble. There's things that we can do that we get in the way because we're distracted by things we actually can't do or can't influence. And so I just ask leaders to be I always like to say, have a truth-bearing analysis, a truth exercise with yourself. What can I influence and what I can't? And what can I influence? Then I better be influencing it. Hopefully, I know it's pretty general, but hopefully that was helpful. I see a question.
Okay, so let's, what do you do when your leaders just don't provide feedback? They don't see the value in it or invest the time?
Oh, that's a great question. If your leader's not giving you and you've asked for it, I've always said, we're responsible to, not responsible for. So if you've asked for it and you've not been able to get it specifically from your leader, which is a challenge, then you do your best to get it from other sources, or you do it right. But feedback isn't the problem. It's just the individual not doing it, right? And so in all your ability, in the best way you can, get it from others who also can observe from a distance, or see it from here, or see it from there. But I promise you, if you make that a priority, eventually that starts to happen either by that leader or some other benefit starts to happen. For your individual growth, feedback is, I always like to say, feedback is the breakfast of champions. So if one person ain't giving it to you, find it from somewhere, because it is literally nutrients to your growth.
Great, thank you. Okay, last question here from Jolie. Goes back to the pandemic. In considering the pandemic in business, it seems there are so many conflicting professional opinions on proper ways to manage day-to-day expectations. This has created significant conflicts in internal teams. As a good leader, how can we deal with internal conflict with such uncertainty?
Without question. And I know Well, I just as a quick example, I'm dealing with a lot of leaders right now with who's working from home, who's coming into the office, I mean, there's just so many difficult dynamics, you know, in certain places where people are, you know, I want to care about every individual, but also we got responsibility, we got to get done. It is very difficult. But I will say it this way, great question. This is I say it often, a leader's success many times can be measured by the number of uncomfortable conversations they're willing to have. That's an uncomfortable conversation that leaders have to be willing to have. And they got to have it where people don't get to hide from it. So, you know, I always say, hey, for those individuals who have to do something different, the clarity of communication and expectations needs to be high. Like you go to them, talk about what is it that needs to be clarified? What is it? Just don't talk in generalities. Like we bring the whole team together and say, hey guys, we got to really line up. And I just say this all the time. Well, if everybody in the room know who you're talking about, but the leader won't mention the person's name, the leader is the one who loses credibility. So leader, go directly to those individuals that you're trying to bring together, let them know what you're trying to do, that it is about their well-being, but it's also how does this impact the team and the benefit of the team? Just get more people in on it. What I've learned is that people are typically up on what they're in on, but you have to kind of control the context in the conversation up front. Then you hear from them. What happens sometimes is a leader directly goes and tries to make it all right for that individual without considering the impact on everybody else. So how do we make sure that we're going to begin this with context of what we all want to accomplish as a team? Then we can deal with the individual things and how we can all make that better and let everybody be in on that conversation. Hopefully that was of value. So.
Yeah, great. All right, Eric, again, it has been a sincere pleasure to have you with us today. And thank you again so much. And, you know, we look forward to potentially having you back in the future. So I hope we can work that out, and we'll continue this conversation. So thanks again.
Hey, thank you. And to all of you, thank you all so much for having me and appreciate you. I'm on also, if you're on LinkedIn, Eric Bowles, please reach out. Please, I love to connect with all of you, okay? Thank you so much for all the feedback coming through. Thank you, guys. All right, God bless you all.
All right, thank you. All right, everybody, we're going to take a brief 5-minute restroom break. So we'll meet back here, it looks like at 3:35. I think my math may be a little fuzzy, but we'll do, or 2:35. Yeah, sorry, 2:35. And we'll join you right back here in a minute. So.
Hi, Jason.
Hey, good afternoon. How are you?
I'm good. Good. Would you like me to go ahead and pull my slides up or wait?
Let's wait just a minute. I think Stacia's going to do your intro, and then we'll get started from there.
Okay, sounds good. So how's your meeting gone so far?
I think it's been very good. What does everybody else think so far? Yeah.
Great.
Okay, Miss Stacia, are you ready?
I am. All right, I want to welcome everyone back from your break, and I'd like to introduce our next speaker, which is Dr. Andrews. Dr. Andrews is a keynote speaker, organizational consultant, business school professor, and author of the best-selling book, The Power of Perception, Leadership, Emotional Intelligence, and the Gender Divide. She's a Forbes contributor, quoted in the Chicago Tribune, interviewed on dozens of podcasts and radio shows, including NPR, and is a Women's Media Center She Source expert. With over 2 decades of corporate experience in the biopharmaceutical industry, she's helped thousands of leaders improve and develop using presentations, workshops, coaching, and psychological instruments. She's an accredited practitioner for EQI 2.0 and EQ 360 model and Insights Discovery Colors. Dr. Andrews serves as a professor at both UC Irvine Paul Mirage School of Business and Pepperdine Graziato Business School, teaching courses on women in leadership, organizational behavior, diversity in organizations, and leadership and ethics. Her specific areas of focus include organizational leadership, learning and development, talent management, diversity and inclusion, and unconscious bias. Dr. Andrews earned her Doctorate of Education degree in organizational leadership from Pepperdine University an MBA degree from Pepperdine University, and a BA degree in psychology from the University of California, Irvine. She serves as board president for the Healthcare Businesswomen's Association, Orange County, is a member of the 2020 Women on Boards Leadership Committee, and is a founder and CEO of Andrews Research International. We're really pleased and privileged to invite Ms. Dr. Andrews to begin her presentation.
Thank you, Stacy. I'm gonna go ahead and pull up my slides. I realized as you were reading that, I probably should have given you my abbreviated introduction instead of going through all that.
You deserve all the accolades.
I know there were some tough words in there, so you did a fantastic job. Okay, can you see my slides, the full screen slide that's up? All right, excellent. So hello, everybody. Hello, this is Ohio, right? Everyone here is hailing from Ohio. I am hailing from Southern California. So for those of you familiar with California, I am based in Orange County, which is right in the middle between Los Angeles and San Diego. So right in the middle, close to Disneyland, Newport Beach, Huntington Beach, Laguna Beach. Those are some landmarks for you. So, okay. So today we're going to talk about driving D&I, inclusive workplace strategies. So essentially, I'm going to share with you my research and data on this topic and talk about how you can, how we could all, actually not you, but all of us, be more mindful of microaggressions. I'm going to give you specific examples. I'm going to talk about the difference between diversity and inclusion. And most importantly, we're going to talk about how to create inclusive cultures in our companies. So you'll see a quote there on the first slide. Diversity is being invited to the party, and inclusion is being asked to dance. And I love that quote because it's really emblematic of the difference between the two. And I'm going to give you the formal difference, but that the quote really, I think, says it very succinctly. So you can be invited to the party. So you could be at the party. You may not be at the table, and you may be a wallflower standing against the wall and not dancing with anyone, but you're there. So the difference between these two is your diversity is just being invited to that party, but actually being asked to dance is the inclusion part. You're being asked to engage with others. You're being asked to contribute with others. That is the inclusion piece. So they are very different concepts. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and let me just rearrange my photos and my chat for a moment so I could see your chat as it comes up. Okay, so let's go ahead and press on. So today, as I mentioned, we'll talk about the difference between diversity and inclusion. I'm going to give you the latest statistics about global diversity trends and what we're seeing on a global scale. Learn how inclusion impacts teams. We're going to explore microaggressions and apply approaches to develop diverse and inclusive workplaces. So, okay, excellent. So, as a global society, we are becoming more diverse every day. Today, more companies are striving to be more diverse and inclusive. This topic has certainly been in mainstream media, especially since the events of 2020. Coincidentally, since we're talking about this topic this week, the trial of Derek Chauvin, the police officer in Minnesota, started this week. So this is a very timely and relevant topic, but because of the events that's happened just in the last year or so, this conversation's gone right back up to the top again, as it should. So more and more companies are talking about, and individuals talking about being diverse and inclusive, but most companies are falling short. Why is that? It's because most companies are not doing the right kinds of activities. They're only focusing on one piece of the issue, or they're not doing enough activities. So most companies are not doing D&I well, or DEI is sometimes referred to, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Most companies are still trying to get there. They're still trying to figure it out. So hopefully this presentation today will help shine some light on that. So, and we're going to talk about programs and policies, but one thing when it comes to D&I is it should be in the DNA of the organization. And what I mean by that is it should be at every level, not just in one department, for example, HR, but it should be at every level and truly embedded into the DNA and the culture of the company. Okay, so let's look at the formal definition between these two. So diversity is defined as a collective mixture of individual and organizational differences. So this can include different values of your employees, different beliefs, personality differences, backgrounds, religion, behaviors, things like that. That's diversity. Inclusion is actually the achievement of a work environment where all individuals are treated fairly and respectfully and have equal access to opportunity and resources and can fully contribute to the company's success. So that's the formal definition of inclusion. Now, there's another concept. It's called diversity management. And this is voluntary organizational actions designed to create greater inclusion of employees into the formal and informal processes of a company. Now, note the word voluntary. The act of addressing diversity and inclusion is absolutely a voluntary activity within companies. Companies have to be, they need to have the will and the desire to be more inclusive and take action. And so it has to be a intentional and voluntary act that companies decide to press on, or excuse me, to enact in their companies. Okay, so let's think of it this way. So you're probably all familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? If you think back to your college days, or maybe even your high school days, we were taught about Maslow. So Maslow's pyramids on the left. So on the bottom, you have your basic psychological or physiological needs: food, shelter, sleep, clothing. So once the concept is, once your basic physiological needs are met, then you can move to the next level in Maslow's hierarchy. The next level is safety. Do I feel personally safe? Do I feel safe in my employment? And do I have enough resources? Am I healthy? Once that level is met, you can move up the pyramid to love and belonging. That's friendship, intimacy in our relationships. Then the next level is esteem. Respecting ourselves, self-esteem, recognition, status, freedom. And then the top of the Maslow pyramid is self-actualization, which is actually the pursuit of our dreams, or the pursuit of meaning, is what that is. So when I started thinking about these concepts of diversity and inclusion, it's very similar to Maslow. So at the pyramid on the right, at the bottom, you have diversity awareness. This sets the foundation for the company. Now, once you have that met, the company can actively move and voluntarily move to diversity management. Then as companies evolve towards the top of the pyramid, they become more inclusive in their culture, and their culture becomes more inclusive. So again, it's analogous to the Maslow pyramid, but if an organization sets out to be inclusive from the start, diversity is naturally going to follow. So some companies even say, focus on inclusion first, like I and D instead of D and I, because diversity is going to follow if your goal from the onset is to be inclusive. Okay, so let's look at the jars of jelly beans as an analogy here. So diversity management is dealing with a collective mixture of employees, right? All types of employees in our companies. And as I mentioned, our companies we're becoming more diverse every day as a global society. So consider jelly beans. So assuming you'll be adding some blue and green jelly beans to the mix. Now, the blue and green could represent Black employees. It could represent Asian employees. It could represent women, whatever it may be for your company. So many managers believe that the blue and green represent diversity. And when faced with a collection of diverse jelly beans, most managers don't truly address diversity. They only address the last jelly beans added to the mixture. But diversity is not those blue and green jelly beans. Diversity is the mixture on the right. That's the diversity. But most managers mistakenly will, or most companies will target, let's say, more Asian employees or more female employees, and they'll call that diversity, and that is not diversity. So in other words, the true meaning of diversity suggests that if you're concerned about racism, you include all races. If you're concerned about gender, you include all genders. And if you're concerned about age, you include all age groups. So the resultant mixture should be all inclusive. That's really what the diversity is. So hopefully that helps put the concepts into perspective. So we also have inherent and acquired diversity. So this is from Center of Talent Innovation, a Harvard article in 2013. So inherent diversity is what we're born with. We all have this. It's your gender, your race, your ethnicity, your sexual orientation, for example. That's your inherent diversity. Acquired diversity is the experience we gain from working with different groups of people that are not like us. So for example, you could get these experiences by working with women or disabled persons, or traveling abroad and experiencing different cultures. So that's an example of acquired diversity. So what data shows is that companies with both types of diversity, both inherent and acquired, outperform and out-innovate companies that don't have these types of diversity. It also, data has shown that leaders need both types to establish culture where employees feel that they can contribute. So both are important. So you already have the inherent diversity in your companies. You don't have to worry about that one. But, well, actually you do. Actually, let me take that back. You do have to worry about that one if your company does not have a diverse workforce. So you actually would focus on the inherent. But the acquired piece is something that all employees could actually gain through their work experience. So the statement on the bottom is a really important statement. And this is really the bottom line of this slide here. So having policies, programs is essential, and that is needed around D&I. But inclusion is always demonstrated in our behaviors, how we treat others, how we interact with other people. Your behaviors is what's going to signal to your colleagues whether your culture is inclusive or not. Okay, and also that called this my duck slide. For those of you who are in management positions where you manage other people, here's something to consider. Is an important aspect of leadership is to turn around and see who's following you. If all your followers look exactly like you, such as these ducks here, then something is wrong, because that's not representative of the global society that we now live in. So your followers should not look exactly like you. Okay, so here's some global diversity trends, looking at on a global scale. So life expectancy has increased in all countries. So we are living and working longer than we ever have before, thanks mostly to public health advancements, better water, access to food in developing countries, but mostly better health and sanitation conditions is the result of that. So we're working and living longer than ever before. So just in the last 5 or 6 years, what has happened is our population has changed. So historically, when you look at populations, global populations, it's always been a pyramid. At the bottom, you have your youngest generations. Above that, you have your next older, then your next older, and at the top of that pyramid is your oldest citizens. That's always been population shapes as for decades. Again, just in the last 5 or 6 years, this pyramid has shifted to a pillar. We now have roughly equal proportions of all generations working side by side. And it's largely a result of the fact that we're working and we're living longer. So we have as much or as many older workers as we do younger workers as there are in the middle. So it's roughly equal proportions of all the generations. And that's a fascinating shift in global trends. What it signals is that we're going to continue to have older workers in our companies. People are staying longer. People are perhaps not retiring as early as they used to be. And so because they're healthier, they can work. So they're staying around longer. And then we have huge amounts of, Generation Z now who just entered the workforce as of 2020. So we have some really interesting age dynamics going on that we need to be aware of. Also, 5 generations working side by side in 2020. We know that millennials have already impacted work expectations and values. Let's do a little quiz here, and I'll see if I can pull my chat box up again. Can anyone review for me so I mentioned 5 generations. What is the oldest generation that is in the workforce still today? And my chat window is actually, I think it's hidden behind my slide. So Stacia or Jason, you may need to read me there what's coming through on the chat.
So we have baby boomers, silent generation, greatest generation, more boomers, and traditionals.
Okay.
Silent, yeah.
Great. Thank you. So it's they're all also called the greatest generation or the silent generation. They're also referred to as the veterans sometimes, or the traditionalists. So you're absolutely right. So those folks now, the youngest one is in that generation is around 75 years old, but there's still a handful of them out there. You know, they may be CEOs or founders of a company, and they just still be working. They may be chairman of the board. You know, they may be consultants, but they're still out there. And so you have that generation. So what's after that? And actually, what was mentioned was baby boomers is next, right? So you have large amounts of baby boomers in the workforce. Boomers, by the way, make up the lion's share of leadership positions still. Who's after the boomers? And again, Jason, if you could read those for me, that'd be great.
We have Gen X, Gen Z, couple more Gen X.
Okay, so it is Gen X is after the boomers, Generation X, and then after X is Generation Y, which is also called the millennials. And then who's after, then I think I already mentioned it, but after millennials is Generation Z. So those are your 5 generations in the workforce right now. So most people start their careers when they're between the ages of 23, 22 to 24 is when most people actually enter the workforce. That is the age, 2020 last year is when Gen Z hit that age point. And so we now have Generation Z starting to enter the workforce is in their early 20s is their first career. So we actually have 6, actually 1, 2, we have greatest generation, we have boomers, we have Xers, we have millennials, and we have Gen Z. So that's the 5 side by side. Okay, another global trend is that birth rates have declined in developed countries such as the US and Europe, but they're surging in developing countries such as Africa and Asia. So what this means is migration across borders to find employment. So we're going to continue to see people of different race, ethnicity in our workplaces, different backgrounds, different religion, different genders, LGBTQ employees, disabled, our ability employees. So more diversity because of the birth rate shift. And we also know that racial and ethnic minorities surpass non-Hispanic whites as the largest group of American children under 5. So according to this statistic is new as of 2014. And what this means is that Caucasian kindergartners are now the minority in the United States for the 7th straight year. So this includes all of the US. So not just on the coast, also middle America. So you may be seeing this even in your schools in Ohio, that racial and ethnic minorities have surpassed non-Hispanic whites for children under 5. So that is another trend, huge trend that is impacting us. And then finally, I have one more slide here. In the decade through 2022, Hispanics will make up 80% of the growth in the labor force. And I have to move a bar to see, women and people of color will constitute 70% of all new entrants into the workforce. So with all of these changes, you could see why this topic is so relevant, and it's top of mind for many companies as well. Okay, so let's press on. Okay, and let's see if there's any questions. It looks like Alicia, you have your hand up. Do you have a question?
I don't see any additional questions in the chat.
Okay. I just see Alicia Williams. It looks like her hand is up. That may have been a mistake, but I just wanted to call that out in case she did have a question. Okay, so I'll press on. And by the way, feel free to stop me if anything I cover is, unclear, or you say, Sean, that doesn't quite make sense. We'll talk a little bit more about it. So here's the business case for diversity inclusion. So basically, why should we care? Why should we care about this topic? So what I've done is I've taken all the data out there and I put it into one slide for you just to simplify it. Top left corner there, I love my job, indicates satisfaction, employee satisfaction. So employee satisfaction increases when companies are more diverse and inclusive. Customer satisfaction also improves. Innovation and creativity improves when companies are more diverse and inclusive. The Rubik's Cube represents problem solving. We know that problem solving is increased by having diverse teams and unique ways of looking at things. Companies have more of a competitive advantage. The rocket there indicates revenue. So companies have greater return. They have greater financial performance companies that are more diverse and inclusive. And then finally, top talent. Companies are able to attract top talent globally if you're looking at a global scale. And so all of these have been linked to studies, lots of studies and lots of data around D&I. So there's really tons of compelling data to show that companies need to be more serious about these topics. So let's look at inclusion and teams. So I'm going to share with you some data from neuroscience and talk about how inclusion and teams impact each other. So you might want to take some notes during this part. This is the most technical I'm going to get, so it gets a little technical, but it's based on neuroscience, but it's very compelling. So this is from the Neuro Leadership Institute. This is the SCARF model of inclusion. So this stands for status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. These are 5 social domains that take us away from threat, psychological threat, and toward psychological reward in our workplaces. So let's review these. So the status, this is, am I respected and valued? So people need to feel, am I respected and valued? They need to have status as part of their, to feel safe. Am I respected and valued? So how could you convey to your employees that they're respected and valued? You could, for example, you could treat everyone the same or ask for their feedback or input. So that's how you can send status signals that they're respected and valued. So the C is certainty. And that is, am I in the loop? People need to feel certain about their workplaces and feel that they are in their loop and they're not being excluded or left out. So how could you, and actually let me ask you these for examples as I go through these. So certainty, how could you send, actually, let me go through them first and then I'll ask for examples. I think it'll make more sense that way. So certainty is, am I in the loop? The autonomy is, am I given choice and control in my job? So am I given the freedom for choice and control? That's the autonomy piece. The relatedness is, do I belong? Am I part of the in-group or a in-group in my company? Do I belong? Do I feel included? And the fairness is, do I get the credit and opportunities that others do? So all 5 of these are critical social domains, again, that help us feel psychologically safe and foster inclusion. So let's go back now. Let me ask you for examples. Can you think of how you can, so I gave you the first one, status, am I respected and valued? So can you think of how you would send signals to your employees that send status signals? So the example I gave was you can treat everyone the same and get their feedback or input. Okay, let's try a certainty. Am I in the loop? What can you do to send certainty signals to your employees or your clients or customers, actually? What are some things do you think you can do to send certainty signals that they're in the loop? I'll go ahead and pull up my chat here. Oops. Jason or Stacia, I can't see chat. Sometimes it pops up, sometimes it goes away, but if you could read me in examples, that would be great.
Of course, communicate clearly, surveys or brochures, a group discussion, follow up with emails, discussion.
I love those. Those are great. Fantastic. So transparent communication is one fantastic way to help employees with the certainty piece, to feel that they're in the loop. So by including everyone in your communication and also your transparent communications, that's great. Okay, let's look at the autonomy piece. Am I giving choice and control? What can you do, again, to send signals to your employees about autonomy? So how would you make them feel that they have choice and control in their jobs?
We have asked them how they plan to approach a given issue, not micromanaging them, ask for input, offer flex time or hours, ask for their opinion, let them lead their department, set parameters but allow for flexibility in how they do their duties.
Fantastic. Those are even more examples that I had written here. So great. In addition to those are all really good. In addition to those, you can consider explaining why. So the why behind why you're asking them to do things. When adults know the why, we actually, once we know that, then we're more apt to take action. Also providing them access to resources and information. That's another thing you can do to send autonomy signals, that they have choice and control, is giving them the resources. So great. Let's think about the relatedness signal. So what can you do to show them that they belong? What are some things you can do to send those relatedness signals?
Include them in decision making, ask for feedback or input, recognize their work and praise them, recognize specific holidays. It says this individual says they give out t-shirts and small items to build a sense of team, recognize hard work.
Okay, so I heard the recognition piece and focusing on teamwork, team building. And again, this is the relatedness, do I belong? So those are great. Other things you can do is show listening through your listening skills, is to actively listen. Most of us, when we are in conversation, we're waiting to speak. So we're formulating in our mind what we're going to say. We wait, and then we're really waiting for a point to jump in and share our opinion. So most of us, unless you've taken any type of listening skills course or workshop, most of us, just based on our society and what's reinforced, is that most of us tend to wait to speak. But focusing on your listening skills, so instead of waiting to speak, truly focusing on what they're saying and being in the present and being in the moment, and asking clarifying questions, that shows the speaker that you're listening. And another way to send relatedness signals that they belong is through empathy. And that's by putting yourself in their shoes and understanding their perspective and where they might be coming from. So great. Those are a few things you can do with the relatedness. And then with the fairness, do I get credit and opportunities that others do? What are some things you can do to send fairness signals to your employees or your customers? So how could you let people know that they do get credit and opportunities that other people do in your company?
Call on all individuals in a meeting.
Okay, that's a great one. Anything else?
Share policies with everyone. Ask for volunteers instead of delegating.
Okay. Yeah, so
I'm sorry, excuse me. Be transparent and have recognition rotate, not just from one time of recognition.
you got it. So recognizing them either publicly or privately, and that's going to vary depending on the person. People who are more extroverted in nature actually prefer recognition that's more public. You know, an award on stage, a big celebration. People that have more introverted tendencies oftentimes are fine with more private recognition. So whatever your employee prefers or your colleague prefers, the recognition piece is important to send those fairness signals. And also, as Stacia mentioned, creating equitable practices and treating all people the same. So that will send the fairness signals. Okay, so here are 3 habits to foster inclusion based on this SCARF model. So to help your employees find common ground with each other, you would want to send the relatedness signals, and that is the do I belong, the empathy, the listening, for example. So relatedness signals is going to help your team find common ground. The second habit to foster inclusion is lifting people up. You can do this by sending status signals and fairness signals. So status again was, am I respected and valued? And the fairness signal is, do I get credit and opportunities that others do? So by sending those 2 signals, you can help lift your team up. And the third habit to foster inclusion is to help create clarity. And the way you do this is to send certainty and autonomy signals. Certainty is, am I in the loop? And the autonomy is, am I giving choice and control in my job? So that's a nice overview of the SCARF model. And again, this is a neuroscience model, but it's based on inclusion. So in brain scans, what's really interesting is exclusion. When someone is in the out group and they are being excluded, it lights up in the same center in the brain as the pain center. So it's identical on brain scans. The feeling of exclusion and pain are identical. It's the same area of the brain. So that's really interesting. Now, there's another model here. I just wanted to let you know this. I won't go into this one as much in depth, but there's a lot of similarities with the SCARF model. So this is another neuroscience model from the Academy of Brain-Based Leadership this time. This is called the safety model. Stands for security, autonomy, fairness, esteem, trust, and you. So the brain functions much more efficiently and creatively with a lack of social threats. So I did an overlay of these 2 models. So some of these words you already recognize from the SCARF model. So security equals the certainty in the SCARF model that we just talked about. Autonomy or independence is the same as autonomy in the SCARF model. Fairness or equity is the fairness, the same in the other model. The esteem part is the same, is similar to the status in the SCARF model. The esteem equals status. Trust is reliability or relatedness, equals the relatedness in the SCARF. And then the U is unique to this model. And what U means is it implies that we have different degrees of what's important to us as employees. So for some people, having security is going to be the most important thing. So a security in your job, to know you're not going to get laid off. So that may be the most important thing for some people. For others, it might be the autonomy, to have that freedom of choice and control in their jobs. That may be number one for many people. For others, it's going to be a sense of fairness on your team. That for you may be the most important thing. So the U is, again, we have different degrees of what's important to us. So, so that is the safety model. Okay, and there's a study I'd like to share with you from Google. So this is called Project Aristotle, and it backs up the two models we just talked about. So what Google did is they looked at how their teams function, and they wanted to know what makes effective and successful teams. And they found the number one thing that makes successful teams, again, is psychological safety. So this was a study done in 2015 at Google. Again, it's called Project Aristotle. So what we know today is that most work in our companies is done in teams now. And as I mentioned, Google set out to determine what makes a highly effective team. Actually, at any company, what's the composition? And what they found at Google is who we work with, different races, different gender, different ages, actually matters less than how the teams work together. So how they structure their work, how they view each other and their contributions. The how matters more than the who. And these dynamics appear in order. So after psychological safety, team members need to, well, let me go over psychological safety first of all. Team members need to feel safe to take risks and to share their ideas in front of others and be vulnerable. So an employee needs to know that when they give input and share their ideas, they're not going to be embarrassed by their colleagues. That's an example of feeling psychologically safe. Dependability, team members get things done on time and meet a high bar for excellence. Structure and clarity in roles and plans was third. Meaning in our jobs is fourth, and impact of the team members, it was number 5. So given the right setup, so here's the conclusion of this. Given the right setup, every team can be effective. The dynamics and again, psychological safety was number 1. So people will leave a company if they don't feel psychologically safe. They also will leave a company if it's not aligned to their values, and go back to the SCARF and the safety models. If it's not aligned to the most important values, people will leave. And also people leave if cultures are not inclusive. Okay, so question for you now. So knowing these things, what's one thing you can do to improve psychological safety and inclusion on your team or at your company? So what thing resonated the most with you? Do you think is would be the most applicable at your company that you could do to improve the psychological safety? And again, my chat box is covered up, Stacia. So if you wouldn't mind reading, that'd be great.
Sure. Yeah, we just got a couple answers. Then we have clarity and clearly communicate expectations, build trust, set ground rules at the beginning of meetings that establish respectful interactions.
Love that.
That's all I see so far.
Okay. So ensuring everyone is heard. I love the ground rules with the meetings. That's a great best practice. So making sure everyone's heard, first of all, that everyone has a voice. Another thing you can do is share credit for successes on the team. Make sure that success is shared. And it's not just individuals taking the credit, because very few things today, I mean, not all, but few things are due only to one person. Again, most work is done in teams. So there's usually people who contribute to success. Giving actionable feedback and implementing candid feedback to the team. Most of us do not get enough feedback. I think I heard your other speaker at the end there talking about feedback, but most people do not get enough feedback, regardless of the position you're at. whether you are the CEO of a company or you're entry level just starting out. Most of us do not get enough feedback, especially candid feedback. So that's a gift that you could give to your colleagues. Having respectful and transparent discussions is another thing you could do to improve psychological safety and inclusion. Respect and support the talent of your team members and their contributions. Establishing group norms that promote collaboration and cooperation is another idea for you. Embracing diversity, certainly could do that. Showing more empathy and personal interest in each other. And my last suggestion is to hold each other accountable to deliver results. So these are all great things you could do to actually, that's in line with neuroscience data that can improve both inclusion and safety.
Dr. Andrews, we did have one other comment that just came in that says, ask for input from team members who may be too insecure to offer it, and then praise them and encourage.
Love that. Yes. Yeah. Again, going back to the introversion, extroversion thing, that's another, I also teach, I do workshops on communication skills. So this is an area near and dear to my heart. And as a professor, I teach this stuff. But not everybody is comfortable contributing outwardly. So asking for feedback is one way. Another way is you can ask for feedback in writing. So if you have a meeting setting, not everybody's going to be comfortable speaking up at that meeting, but you could ask for feedback in writing ahead of time and then discuss it at the meeting. So that's going to go a long way with your colleagues who may be more introverted. So yes, excellent suggestion. Okay, great. So let's talk about microaggressions. And I'm going to spend some time on this section because it's important. So here we go. So microaggressions. So there's a term called microaffirmation, and then we have microaggressions. So most people have heard of microaggressions, but what these are is everyday interactions that send signals to others about whether they're part of the in-group or the out-group. So here's the formal definition of these for you. Microaggressions are defined as verbal, behavioral, and environmental indignities that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative racial slights and insults to a target person or group. So basically, they're subtle forms of interpersonal discrimination. So that's the formal definition. Microaggressions. So we also have microaffirmations, which are just the opposite. So we also send signals to others that are affirming that they're part of an in-group. So that may be sending a communication out and including everyone. It may be nonverbals that we're giving them when they're talking to you. So for example, if someone's talking to you, and I'll give two examples. So if they're talking to you and you're nodding, you're smiling, you're asking them clarifying questions, maybe you're being empathetic, those are micro affirmations. So they're little signals you're sending to them that, yeah, I like what you're saying, keep going. And it could be, including them in a project, or inviting, it could be inviting someone to lunch even. Those are some microaggressions, or micro affirmations. But the microaggressions gets much more attention as it should. And again, these are everyday signals that we send. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to review with you microaggressions for different races. Also for gender, so different categories of people. So think about the words and behaviors that you use. Okay, first of all, this is for our Black colleagues, our employees, or African American. When I see you, I don't see color. So that may be the statement, and actually I hear this one all the time. Now, it sounds like a pretty innocuous statement, right? And it sounds like we're being unbiased when we say, when I see you, I don't see color. But what the message is to that person is that you don't acknowledge their Blackness and you won't hold it against them. That's often the message that they receive from that statement. Another one is, we are all one race, the human race. And this is the message that this could send, is that your experience as a Black person is no different from the experience of people of other races. So basically, it's not acknowledging the race of the person. And in this case, if they're a Black person or a Black colleague. You're so articulate. I also hear that one a lot. But the message it sends, though, is Black people are not usually capable of competent intellectual conversation. So again, think about the words we're using and the possible message that it's sending to other people. Another one is another microaggression is I see your hair is big today. Are you planning to wear it like that to the client meeting? I've heard this one a few times as well. The message that could be received is natural Black hairstyles are not professional in the workplace. And then that last microaggression or bias statement there, everyone can succeed in society if they work hard enough. A lot of us believe that, right? And there's nothing wrong with believing that. But by saying it to a colleague of color, the message could be that disparate outcomes for Black people result from laziness. So these are some, again, possible signal messages that is being received, the likely messages that's being received from these microaggression statements. Okay, so let's take another one. Let's look at, here's a few microaggressions for LGBTQ employees, Asian employees, or Latinx. If you haven't seen that term before, Latinx, it refers to Latino or Latina, and the X represents either male or female. That's so gay. I'm sure you've heard this one. This one's been around for several years now. I still hear this one. Now, what the message is you're equating gay people with being stupid or dumb. So when we say that's so gay, we're meaning, well, that's so stupid or that's so dumb. There's about 100 other words you could use instead of gay here. You know, insert any other word, that's so lame or that's so dumb, but by saying that's so gay, you're equating stupidity with gay people or being dumb with gay people. And that's a very derogatory term. Another one is your English is so good. The message that this can send to Asian people is that they don't usually speak English well, but you're trying to compliment them on their language is the intention, but the impact is that, well, you're saying that because Asian people don't speak well. Why are you so quiet? This is actually one I hear a lot towards people who are more introverted or people of different ethnicities. Why are you so quiet? The message or the impact there is you should assimilate to the dominant culture and be more like everyone else. And there's no room for difference. Those are possible messages or impact of that statement. And then finally, were you born in the United States? Okay, seemingly innocuous again. But the message that this sends is that, for example, Latinx people, maybe illegal immigrants are not true Americans. So again, by going through these, I want you to be aware of them, but think about the words or behaviors that you may use as well and how it could be possibly perceived. Let's look at gender. So there's a few here for gender. First of all, labeling an assertive female as a B, while describing a male counterpart as a forceful leader. So this is a classic example of a double standard, but the message it sends to women is that by being aggressive they're being aggressive or out of line when they're being assertive or confident. So we're telling them basically that that's not okay. You shouldn't behave like this. And it's out of line with being a female. Another type of example of microaggression here is asking a female coworker, do you plan on having children? Okay, how many of you do this one? Again, a very common statement that we ask. The message that it sends or the potential impact is that women should be married and having kids. So we're making an assumption that because she's a female of perhaps childbearing age, that it's naturally assumed that she's going to have children. She may not want children at all. She may not want to marry at all, and that's perfectly fine. But we're also making assumptions about her. Here's another one that's quite common. You're a woman, you don't have to be good at math. I hear that one a lot. The impact or the potential message is that women are less capable at math. And actually, there's a lot of data. I've looked at this one a lot. There's a lot of data out there that when you look at boys and girls very early, who are both great at math. So if you take a young girl who's fantastic at math, by junior high, she starts getting these messages, and she starts hearing, well, girls aren't good at math. And I have heard stories of so many girls who were actually quite good at math, and they leave it. They leave it in middle school, and by the time they get to high school, they move away from it and towards something else. This is also quite common in STEM fields: science, technology, engineering, and math fields. So women who are quite good, equally as good as young boys, get these messages and hear these messages very strongly at adolescent age and tend to steer away from it. And so this is an issue today. Even there's not enough women in STEM fields. And a lot of it is because of the messages that we send, the signals that we send young women about these areas. I had one father, I was actually teaching a class about this, and I had a father speak up and say, my daughter was, I think she was 12 or 13, and she was always really good at math. And about age, and she actually wanted to go into the field of math. And at age 13, she turned away from it. And I asked him why. And he wasn't sure at first why she did it, but then she realized it was what she was hearing at school from her teachers and her classmates, and even the media. The cartoons that she watches, or the books we read, often reinforce these messages. So it is very real. Another microaggression here is using the pronoun he or saying you guys to refer to all people. This one is extremely common. I have to say I do this, and I have to catch myself and be mindful about it. What it refers to, and most of us have not thought this deeply about it, but when we say he as a general pronoun, or you guys, referring to a group of people, the message is that the male experience is universal and the female experience is more invisible. It also perpetuates men as majority and preference. So again, consider the impact and the message you might be sending. And then the myth of meritocracy. I want to give you some examples of microaggressions here. So most of us, well, let me just ask you, let me use the chat feature and ask you here, how many of you feel that your companies are a meritocracy, meaning you hire people based solely on skills and competencies? How many of you believe that? It looks like my chat's covered up again, Stacey.
Yes, so far we're seeing responses that says they do believe that.
Okay.
For the most part, I believe it, but I have my doubts sometimes.
Okay. Any other opinions?
Nope, they've all been yes or that single one.
Okay, so it sounds like the majority of people say yes, that their companies perhaps do hire based on skills and competencies alone. So I wish I could say the answer was yes. The answer is no. We do not live in a meritocracy. Now, most of us actually, and thank you for your responses. Most of us do feel that our companies, hire truly just based on the skills and competencies and the best person for the job. But because of biases, because we all have biases based on our background, our upbringing, our religion, our values, we all have blind spots about our biases. So first of all, we're all biased. We need to acknowledge that we all carry certain biases with us. And when we hire people for our companies, bias is in every part of the process, including how companies recruit, and even the interview itself, there's biases. So for example, if you're interviewing a candidate for a job, as soon as that candidate walks in the door, we're sizing them up within milliseconds, and we're making connections and we're making assumptions based on our biased beliefs, for example. So you may be looking for commonalities. You may be looking at their race or their ethnicity. Data shows that we recognize race within 120 milliseconds. We're already making assumptions of people that fast. So bias is actually, it's in how we recruit, but it's actually introduced in the interview itself as well. And so because of bias and processes, and that's actually a different talk, I could go much deeper into biases, but I do want to mention it here because it definitely plays into diversity and inclusion and also microaggressions, is because of bias, we don't live in a meritocracy. We don't always hire the best person for the job. We don't always hire the best person with the best skills and competencies because of our biased beliefs. We often look for other things. We look for commonalities, perhaps we're from the same neighborhood as they are, or we go to the same church or the same alma mater, same college. We look for commonalities in people, and we generally tend to favor people who look like us versus people who are opposite of us. So because bias is embedded, we don't always hire the best person for the job. So, and I want to make that point because it's a really important point that I think we need to recognize, is that we don't live in a meritocracy, even though we want to, and we absolutely should. We don't because of bias. Bias is in the equation. So here's a few microaggressions around meritocracy topic. Is I believe the most qualified person should get the job. The message that sends is that people of color are incompetent and need to work harder. And so I hear this one a lot. I believe the most qualified should get it. But again, the potential message to people of color is that they're perhaps need to work harder. Of course, he'll get tenure even though he hasn't published much. He's Black. Again, the message, a potential message is people of color are given unfair advantages because of their race. Are you the new diversity hire? How many of you hear that one? Or perhaps use that yourself? The message that sends is people of color have not gotten the job based on their qualification or their merits. They've gotten the job for other reasons. Perhaps check in the diversity box. Another microaggression is men and women have equal opportunities for achievement. The message that sends is that the playing field is even. So that goes on the assumption that it's an even playing field. So if women can't make it, the problem's with women. So that's also another very important one we need to be aware of. And also, that's a very common one that I hear. Okay, and then finally, there are nonverbal microaggressions as well. It could be you left someone off an email list. The message is they're not needed or not important. Or left them off a project, perhaps. Perhaps they weren't invited to the meeting or the project. And the signal is you're not part of the in-group. Negative body language when speaking. So let's go back to the conversation again. So if you're in conversation with someone, instead of nodding, asking questions, listening, showing empathy, perhaps you're looking away. Perhaps you're checking your watch. Perhaps you've got your arms crossed. The signal that sends is either I'm not listening to you, I don't care about you, I don't care about what you have to say. So nonverbal send a very strong message. Or just dismissing their suggestions or feedback. And the message there is that your ideas aren't valuable. Okay, so I just covered a lot here. Any questions or just comments about these microaggressions in general? And while those are coming in, also, do you feel that you've used some of these in the past?
Our group has gotten quiet. I've got crickets. Okay, here's some. So unfortunately, yes, they've used those. This was very interesting. I would be interested to know more about unconscious bias. Do you offer additional training in this?
Yeah, absolutely. The bias it's a related topic, but different topic. And that presentation, I do presentations / workshops on the topic. And I talk about the what, why, and how of biases. So why are we biased? Where does it come from? Our brains actually are wired against biases, not towards it. So excuse me, let me phrase that. Our brains are wired towards bias. And there's a couple reasons for that. And so we have to be mindful and intentional, very intentional about interrupting the process and bringing our unconscious biases to the surface so that we're aware of them and we can address them. So I talk about all types of biases we see in the workplace, race, ethnicity, gender, age, LGBTQ, but there's many others. There's veteran status, there's pregnancy, there's height, weight, introversion, background. So I talk about all those types of biases, and then we work through a couple bias scenarios and talk about what you would do in this scenario, and then we talk about strategies to address and minimize biases. So it's a different talk, but it has a lot of overlap with what we're talking about right now with the microaggressions.
Dr. Andrews, I'm sorry, excuse me.
I was just going to say, these microaggressions often stem from hidden biases that we may have. We may not be aware of our biases towards Black people, for example, or towards gay people, or towards Asian or women. We may have biases that we're just simply not aware of, and so that's why I'm pointing this out. I know this may be a little uncomfortable for some of you, but the main thing to acknowledge is that we all have biases. We all bring biases into the workplace. As humans, we're biased, but there are things we can do to minimize bias in ourselves, but also in our organizational processes.
Some additional comments that have come in are, we use guys in place of everyone, the term guys. I think my answer is yes, I don't want to, but I also know unconscious bias is a real thing that drives my thinking without actually realizing it, and probably more nonverbal microaggressions. And then I think that some of the microaggressions are based on facts, like some people do get preference. For example, veterans, I know there are reasons for the preferences, but I think it contributes to frustrations on those left out. Negative body language.
Yeah, well, thank you. Fantastic comments. Really, really fantastic. So, and I think the comment about most of your microaggressions may be nonverbal, and that's very true. Maybe you're not bold. You're not bold enough to come out and say these things, but you may be thinking them, and you show them through your nonverbal behavior. That's extremely common. So that very well could be the case for many of you on this call today. So now, and I'm going to talk about it coming up, but since we're on the topic, the whole point of pointing these out is it's not about your intention with these statements. So on the left-hand side, the examples is how you intend. You didn't intend to offend, right? Most of us do not intend to offend. But the important message to take away from this is the message on the right, and that's the impact. So impact supersedes intention. And you might want to write that down, because when it comes to this topic, inclusion and bias, that is the most important concept. Intention does not supersede impact. So what I mean by that is, if you call someone out for one of these microaggressions or one of these bias statements, if you call them out, they'll say, well, I didn't mean it that way, right? Almost every time they will say that, I didn't mean it that way. And most of us don't intentionally mean to offend people. But what's more important is to focus on the impact it had on the individual or the target population. So you can appreciate their willingness to clarify their intent. That's perfectly fine. But hope that they appreciate your willingness to clarify the impact that it had on the person. And the person may be you that's experiencing this, or it could be something you've observed. So impact supersedes intention when it comes to diversity, inclusion, and bias. And also, just one other quick comment. I know we're almost at the time now, but I gave this presentation recently to another group, and one of the comments I got, especially going back to the guys there, this one, the one at the bottom, referring to everyone as guys, that is very common. Most of us do that. And the comment I got from one of the employees was that, well, the pendulum's this is ridiculous. Pendulums swung the other way. Why do we have to be aware of these things? Why should we care? And I thought about what she said, and my response is, these have always been the messages from these microaggressions. These have always been the messages we're sending. We just weren't aware of them 10 or 20 years ago. They've always been there, but we've evolved more as a society, as a global society, and our workplaces have evolved more. Now we have more sensitivity and awareness of these microaggressions. So they've always been there. Yes, they have always been there. We're just more aware of them now. So it may feel to you, it may feel like the pendulum's just gone to the extreme, but the messages have always been there. We're just now waking up and realizing it, and we now have an awareness of the signals that the impact that it truly has or can have on people. So here's a microaggression framework I'd like to leave you with. This is from Harvard in 2020, actually. It's called the 4D framework. So discern means how much of an investment you want to make in addressing this microaggression. So let's say you're the target of it. How much of an investment do you want to make? If it's an important relationship for you, acknowledge your concern and your care for the other party. Acknowledge your feelings. If you're mad, if you're angry about the statement, then do it later. Don't do it right then. If you're confused about it, then say something now. So ask them to clarify their intent, at the time if you're confused. Or you have an option of not addressing it at all. There's a few options there. You also need to consider or discern how you want to be perceived. There are consequences both for speaking up and remaining silent. So for people who has been the target of a microaggression, you have to also consider how you want to be perceived and weigh the importance of the relationship and your feelings. The disarm is by explaining that the comment made you uncomfortable. Invite them to get to the root of their behavior together. So you may say, this comment makes me uncomfortable. Maybe I'm a little confused about it. Tell me more about what you're thinking. Where did this comment come from? So you can actually explore it together. That's the disarm. The defy is challenge them to clarify. So how did you mean that? And that's a very unoffensive way of saying, let's explore this. How did you mean that? Bob or John or Susan, how did you mean that comment? Accept their intention as stated, but focus on the impact. And then the last one, decide what you'll take from the interaction and what it will take from you. Let protecting your joy be your greatest act of resistance. So that's the 4D model of microaggressions. And then Black Lives Matter. This is a statement that actually came out of the BLM movement. Respect existence or expect resistance. I think it's a fantastic quote. We're living in a different time now. And as I mentioned earlier, this week is the trial of the Minneapolis police officer. So this is front and center. But we're living in a time where people are no longer tolerant of injustice and inequities in their communities and in their neighborhoods. So if we don't respect existence in others, then you can expect resistance. And then here's a note for non-Black allies. The work of allyship is difficult. You will make mistakes as you learn, and you will always be learning. We all are learning all the time on these topics. Get comfortable rethinking much of what you thought to be true about the workplace, and accept that you have likely been complicit in producing inequities. Again, the reason for that is because we have biases that we bring into the equation. Cultural change takes time and intention. It's up to each of us to respond in the way that's consistent with who we are and how we want to be perceived. And a couple tips here for anyone accused of committing a microaggression. Believe your colleagues, particularly your Black colleagues, when they choose to share with you their experience. The reason we should believe people of other races and ethnicities about their experience is because the evidence won't be there in our minds. We didn't experience it. We don't have that lived experience. The evidence will not be there. So we need to start listening to and believing their experiences. And again, remember that intent does not supersede impact. And then finally, the inclusive workplace. So there are 4 models. There's 4 levels of inclusion. Let's talk about how you can create an inclusive culture. So diversity is getting people in the door, and inclusion is keeping them and enabling their best work. So to get the benefits of diversity, that jelly bean mixture we talked about earlier, we have to have inclusion. So the benefits of diversity require inclusion, and it's an issue for everybody. Most of our behavior is ambiguous. In most of our behavior with others, we are not crystal clear. We're ambiguous. We don't always send crystal clear signals. So if we're not actively including other people in our behaviors, in our projects, in our work, we're probably accidentally excluding others. I'll say that again. If we're not actively including other people, we're probably accidentally excluding them. So we need to be mindful and we need to be intentional about being inclusive. So as I mentioned, there's 4 levels of inclusion. Level 1 is within the company itself, within your organization or your company. Level 2 is inclusion within your local community. Level 3 inclusion is at the state and federal level. And level 4 inclusion is globally. So most companies operate at level 1 inclusion. So I'm going to give you some strategies here on how to create inclusion at level 1. Leadership involvement, first of all. And again, you might want to take notes if you're in the space or if you want to create more inclusive cultures at your companies. First of all, leadership involvement, create a top level strategy. It needs to come from the C-suite. The CEO, the COO, the Chief Human Resources Officer, or maybe the Chief Diversity Officer if you have one. So it should come from the top. Assign a top executive responsibility for leading or sponsoring your diversity programs, and create a diversity council of employees from various departments. The reason it has to come from the top is because most people, 60% of employees don't believe what their CEO says about diversity and inclusion. So that's a real problem. There's a disconnect because from what CEOs say, they may say we are diverse and inclusive, but if they don't see it in the behaviors, then it's just lip service. So it's critically important that leadership is involved. Second is policies and procedures. An example of this is having diversity-related mission statement. You could have anti-discrimination policies. You could have it as one of your corporate values or in your behavioral standards. Education and training. So an example of this is what we're doing today, having a presentation and discussion on diversity and inclusion, providing unconscious bias workshops or presentations. And the point of these is to bring awareness, help build skills, and help employees understand the importance and the need for these topics. Performance and accountability, what that refers to is establishing diversity goals within your company. Perhaps it's quotas, perhaps it's metrics, but if you don't measure it, you can't manage it. So develop action plans to meet specific business goals and hold managers accountable by linking diversity performance to their compensation. That piece is one of the most important pieces, and it's often missing in most companies. Linking managers' accountability to diversity performance, linking the performance to their compensation. Work-life balance, offering flexible work arrangements. So this could include telecommuting, job sharing, working from home, part-time assignments to accommodate diverse needs. Does anyone, and I'm going to ask you to chat something here, does anybody happen to know, as a result of COVID and as a result of working from home model that we're all in still, how many women left the workforce in 2020 because of work from home situations? Does anyone want to guess how many women left the workforce? And it looks like I'm covered up again, Stacia. So.
Yeah, 50 million is one guess and 70% and 45%. 50 million is another guess.
50 million. Okay. It is a million. It is, I was looking for, I should have clarified, not a percentage, but a million. 3 million women left the workforce in 2020 because of work-life balance issues. Women are trying to manage, like all of us, first of all, we're all trying to manage a career working from home, right? Many of you, I'm sure, are as well. But on top of that, women are also have the lion's share of the caregiving of the children. And women often have the lion's share of the household duties, the cooking, the cleaning, the grocery shopping, and the laundry and the dishes. So women are simply overwhelmed with trying to manage all of it. Plus there's elder care on top of all this, caring for your in-laws or your own parents. So women have the lion's share of these, and it's because of work-life balance. We've lost 3 million women from the workforce. That's going to have huge implications on the future leaders and how women impact the workplace. So companies really need to look at this, and we're really at a crossroads right now with how companies are going to address this issue of work-life balance. Career development and planning. An example there is to establish career development initiatives for women and underrepresented groups to ensure fair promotion practices and increase diversity in your managerial ranks. The employee networks, those are ERGs or affinity groups. ERG stands for Employee Resource Group, right? This is often the first thing that companies do when they want to be inclusive, is they establish an ERG, which are fantastic. ERGs, usually you have a women's group, you have an African-American group, a Latinx group, an Asian Pacific Islander group, and then bigger companies even may have more. But affinity groups are great. You also could look at mentoring programs or providing mentoring programs for people of diverse backgrounds, and have a matching program for mentoring. And then finally, communication, providing transparent diversity-related communications, both internally within your company and externally, and utilize company-wide diversity engagement surveys. Those are a couple things around the communication piece that you can do to be more inclusive. Okay, so with that, I'll go ahead and skip this just because we're a little short on time. Next steps: continue the dialogue about diversity, inclusion, talent, and culture at your company. Secondly, look at your work teams. Is there enough diversity to avoid groupthink, to offer different perspectives and create innovation? If you have a group of like-minded individuals, it's not going to occur to anybody to think outside the box or think differently. So the beauty of diversity is you get different perspectives. You get from different life experiences. And so look at your teams. Do you have enough diversity to avoid groupthink? Measure and plan. Measure and collect data at both the individual and group level at your organization, and look at developing at least a 5-year strategic D&I plan. And then finally, here's the cool part: you don't need a majority to make things change. Critical mass is the smallest amount of material required to make a chain reaction. There's something called the rule of 3, or the 30% rule, it's sometimes referred to. So if you have one person in a team or in a group that's different than the dominant workforce. So it could be one African-American, an Asian, it could be a woman, it could be LGBTQ, it could be a disabled person. One person in a group is often referred to as tokenism. So you have the token X, the token whatever. 2 people is better, but sometimes it works against each other, and it's not enough for critical mass. And then 3 people, when you have 3 of anything in a group, 3 women, 3 Black people, 3 Asian people in a group, the conversation and the power dynamics start to shift. So those people feel more empowered that their ideas are going to be heard and implemented. So there's a magic number with the rule of 3. That's when you tip the power dynamics and the conversation. Okay, and finally, I leave you with this: is be a Jedi master. Justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. focusing on these things will help us create more inclusive workplaces. So thank you very much. I leave you with my email. If you have any questions, I'm happy to follow up. I'm happy to connect with you on social media. And I don't know if you announced, Tasia, to the group, but you all will be receiving a copy of my book, which is actually due to arrive tomorrow at the Chamber of Commerce. So Jason, that's coming attention to you. Those books should be there tomorrow. I have signed every book. For all of you will be receiving this. And actually the presentation I gave today is based on the chapters in the book. And then I also have a free download if you're interested. It's a 25-page self-assessment based on every chapter of the book, and that's available as a free download on my website. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
There are lots of thank yous coming in, though there was one question. It was about the PowerPoint. Is that shareable? Because not everyone could take all the notes that they wanted to.
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't share my slides. The reason for that is this research is proprietary to my book.
Perfect.
Yeah. A lot of it's from my own research and research that's in the book. So I can't share the slides, but I'm happy to answer any question anyone has. I've provided my email address there, and I'm happy to connect on social as well for follow-up.
Yeah, just lots of thank yous coming in, and it's a great workshop, great training, awesome workshop.
Go ahead and stop sharing. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. I know I covered a lot today, and hopefully you don't have writer's cramp from taking too many notes, but it's a very important topic. So thank you for asking me to speak today, and I hope that this was valuable to you. And I wish all of you the best of luck on your Jedi journey.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation. We are very lucky to have had you to speak today.
Thank you, Dr. Andrews. Appreciate it. So,
Thank
Stacia,
you.
do you have any final comments before I get into follow-up items or?
Nope, I think we're good. Thank you, Jason.
Okay, so again, thank you everybody for being here and being a part of these great discussions we had. We look forward to continuing these throughout our community. I know I walked away with a lot of great insight and information, so looking forward to implementing some of that into what I do personally. But just to follow up, we will reach out to you guys via email in the next couple weeks to kind of go over the video links that we had, the books, how to get Dr. Andrews' books, and things like that. We'll also have a brief survey that goes out as well. So that'll be in about 2 weeks. Personally, I'm going on vacation next week with Easter, so just give me a little bit of time, but we will get that information out to you guys. But see, I did it. See, but I recognize that I said you guys, so I guess that's an improvement. But
you did. The fact that you recognized it, Jason, is a huge step.
I guess
I say it a lot too, but yes, good job.
Yep. So everybody, again, thank you, and enjoy your holiday, and keep on doing great things out there. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.